madness and mayhem.
I'm absolutely delighted that he came in Christmas Eve to talk to us. They'll have to find a new word for intrepid. This is a Middle East reporter called Paul Martin. He has been banged up by Hamas in Gaza for 26 days and survived. He recently returned to Syria and Lebanon. He has amazing stories for us, a great storyteller. He's coming up, first of all, after 10 o'clock.
And I'm jealous because you are actually going to be distributing Christmas officially through the airwaves from Talk. You're doing it.
They had to find a non-Grinch.
I've got to go. Look, Merry Christmas.
Merry
everybody.
Christmas,
Thanks for the last 3 hours. Merry Christmas to Johnny. He's coming up next. See you again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a Merry Christmas to you. My name is Jonny Gould. I am officially the person to guide you, sleigh ride you into Christmas. I suppose I'm the nearest thing to a non-Grinch on the station. I mean, would you want Julia Hartley-Brewer to do the job? Would you want Mike Graham or Kevin to do the job? I don't think so. You want someone who's got a smile on their face. That's right, it's Christmas time. But that doesn't mean that the subjects are going to be that light. We're going to ebb and flow through the news, and we're going to keep it light as well. And we're going to invite your calls throughout the show, 0344 499 1000. Who is your Christmas Grinch this festive season? Is it the obvious ones at the top of our current government, or is it perhaps someone from public life, or maybe a Prince Harry or someone that from showbiz or entertainment that's really annoyed you? Perhaps give us a call. We're going to open up calls in the final hour of the show, but you can book your call now, 0344 499 1000. Of course, you can tweet us at all times at talkTV and at Jonny Gould, and the conversation will be rich for the next 3 hours if you join me on the show, I assure you. Later on in the programme, we're going to have Claire Muldoon reviewing the morning papers. Now, you might say, they don't publish newspapers on Christmas Day. Well, that is true. They don't distribute them because the newsagents aren't open. But however, for about the last 15 years or so, they have been providing us with PDF online versions because obviously the internet never sleeps and our national press has become international, particularly in the English-speaking world. So we will be reviewing the morning papers, the morning PDFs, I think we should call them, this Christmas morning right here on talkTV. And I tell you what else. We are going to be reviewing some of the films that are available either on Netflix or Amazon Prime or even in your movie theatres. We're going to be talking to Van Connor. He is going to review Mufasa, the Lion King. We've got clips of that as well, Better Man, and the new Star Wars movie, another one. Well, you wouldn't let it lie, would you, George Lucas? You wouldn't let it lie. There's another one of those coming as well. Apparently Spider-Man, all these franchises. Is there anything new and original? That's the question. Claire Muldoon will be away with the papers as well. But first, I wanted to open the show with a terrific guest who's become a fast friend of mine over the last few years. He is a distinguished international correspondent. Boy, does he have a story. They will have to reinvent the word intrepid for this guest, for he goes into the lion's den to get the best story. And if you're talking about barriers to entry, if you're talking about getting a story when no one else will, my guest who is here in the studio with me has done that throughout his career. His credits are with, among many, many other places, Newsweek, Mirror Group newspapers, a correspondent for the BBC. Please welcome to the studio. It's Paul Martin.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I doubt if I can live up to it, but I will try. Easily. We were chatting earlier on in the day about the show, and among many other things, you've also been a tennis commentator. What a long career you've had. Well, I once even went from Lebanon during the war in 1982.
Right.
I was only a kid.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. And from there, I went straight from Beirut across the front line, the green line, between the Christian and Muslim sectors where war was raging, went 10 miles up the road, got a hitch to ride on a warship, an Italian warship taking refugees, got to Cyprus, flew to Cairo, picked up my wife. Yes, she was my wife at the time, and still is. And within 24 hours of the gunfire of Beirut, I was hearing the thwack of tennis ball on tennis racket, eating strawberries and cream, and getting press handouts. And that's the kind of contrast in my life.
That is terrific, and that's just the colour piece here of what Paul Martin's been through. And one of the catalysts for Paul coming on the show is that you've again just returned from Lebanon and Syria, two war fronts which have changed dramatically in the last 2 or 3 months. We've seen the fall of the dictatorship in Syria. We are seeing an attempt by, I think, among others, the factions in Syria to try and break out in democracy, if that's possible, because at the moment it seems that HTS is another Islamist dictatorship who are, I suppose, quelling their public face at the moment to try and say, well, we won't gun any of our revenge down, and yet that is happening. Christmas trees are being burnt, aren't they, by Islamists around Syria, from what I understand. It's a tinderbox, isn't it, despite the calls for democracy?
Yes, well, I've only heard of one Christmas tree being burnt down today, and and immediately HTS wanted to distance themselves from it and said it was an aberration and they'll build a new one. And they will not allow this to happen again. But whether they can control all the conflicting forces, including within their own ranks, is the $64,000 question.
Because Syria has been on the map for thousands of years. It has had an indigenous Christian population and a Muslim population for the last 1,400 years. And in the land of Israel, which extended up into what is part of Syria today, there was an indigenous Jewish tribal population indeed. There are virtually no Jews at all left in Syria, and indeed, tragically, under the Assad regime, the Christian population has severely declined as well, hasn't it?
Yes, well, that's true. I stayed in a lovely Christian hotel. It was a sort of boutique hotel on one of my trips to Damascus, And interestingly enough, the Christians have tended to be supporters of Assad and the Assad regime. You wouldn't think so, logically, but the reason is they're very afraid that hardliners of the kind that are now in Damascus would take over and discriminate much more viciously against the Christians. So although Assad wasn't pro-Israel, by no imagination, officially Syria is at war with Israel, has been since 1947-48. The Christians felt more protected generally under Assad than they now would feel, and they're very much afraid that things will go from bad to worse.
Let's talk about other minorities in Syria as well, because we have the Kurds. The Kurds are unlikely to give up any of their weapons when we understand that the HTS crew, who are the nearest, shall we say, to forming some kind of governance, are influenced and financed by Turkey, the archenemy of the Kurdish people. So there is going to be a battle in the Kurdish strongholds of Syria. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, in the south of the country, the Druze, a small tribe who you will see also in northern Israel, who have their own villages and live freely in northern Israel, are looking at their cousins over the border from Syria and saying, hey, we wouldn't mind being part of Israeli territory. Israel has taken some of Mount Hermon beyond the Golan Heights. Let's talk about the Kurds, and then let's talk about the Druze. You know, we're looking at a failed state here, really, aren't we?
Oh, definitely. The Druze are a minority that is significant. The Kurds are even more significant because they control quite a large area in the northeast of Syria. I've been there. I was there in 2019, crossing the river from Iraq into northern Syrian Kurdistan by a pontoon bridge, and then going to some of these border towns. Some of them are close to the Turkish border, and the Turks are very much against what the Kurds are doing because they're worried that other Kurds could attack them. They've been attacking in Syria, or having a clash with attacking the Turks for decades, and the Turks are afraid that they'll become a kind of base for attacks on Turkey. So Turkey's had its designs on northern Syria for a long time, and these clashes are starting to break out. However, we've been hearing today that the new leader, apparent leader of Syria, has said he's going to bring all the armies, the different conflicting armies, together in one armed force, and they'll all live happily ever after. We shall see.
What are the chances of that? I know it's way, way too early. And he is talking peace, man. He is talking about a new Syria. But they all say that, don't they?
Well, he's so far said the right things. He's even changed his sort of military garb into something a bit more smart. He's wearing a tie, for example.
Goodness.
Yes, he's become a real statesman by putting on a tie. But it doesn't necessarily fool people, and everybody is nervous, including the Americans, including the region, including the Israelis, including many of the Gulf states, as to whether or not he will inflict much more Islamization of the country, and also whether he can indeed hold that country together.
Yes. 03444991000 if you've got a question for Paul Martin here. So we're talking about the Druze, the Kurds, Israel in the south. We're talking about the Muslims, which is the overall majority here. And also we're talking about the influence of imperial nations. Iran always used Syria as a bridge towards their attempt, a weak attempt at destroying Israel. And of course the Russians have been involved in Syria for some time. But of course, this revolution, I think that's what we should call this, in Syria, has seen the very sudden emergence of Turkey as a regional power at the expense of both Russia and Iran at the same time. What is the future of Iran and Russia in Syria?
Well, the Russians have left with their tail between their legs.
They've gone, haven't they?
Not entirely, because they have two things that are very important to them in the northeast and the eastern part, in fact, of Syria. One is an airfield, a very important, powerful airfield, but most important for them is the port of Tartus, which provides Russia with the only naval base in the Mediterranean. And there's no sign that they've left there. Some of the ships have sailed out of the port, apparently, but that is going to be very important for them to hang on to. They've had it during a large amount of the time that the Assads were in power, and I'm sure there's going to be an effort to cling on to that port, but they're not going to have the same powerful influence on day-to-day government policy or war waging that they had before, partly, of course, because they're involved in a clash in Ukraine, and partly because of the collapse of the Assad regime, which they did very little to prevent.
Right, they did. I mean, they propped him up for decades, actually.
Absolutely. Particularly they came in 2014, 2015, when Assad was really in big trouble, and there were rebel forces quite close to Damascus, and that's when they came in and enforced their regime. But of course, Iran had been not only putting some of its own forces in there, but mainly was relying on its ally Hezbollah, which came from Lebanon, and the Hezbollah forces came in from Lebanon into Syria and helped to turn the tide and stayed there, also helped to train them up in fighting, of course, across the border with Israel. But now they've also probably entirely left because they were hit very badly by Israel during the clashes in Lebanon. So for both reasons, the absence of the Russian forces, the absence of the Iranian forces and their proxies, Assad was left entirely alone, and it turned out that his whole army was hollowed out. Very few had been paid properly. There was very little dynamism within the army. There was infighting within the army, and they came to the conclusion it wasn't worth fighting the much better organized forces from the north and from the south, and they just threw their arms down and melted into the population in general. And some of them have been handing in weapons that they've taken home and things like that. So it's a huge humiliation for the Russians, for the Iranians, for the Lebanese Hezbollah, and indeed for also, you might say, for secularism, because whatever you might say about Assad, he was not an Islamic fundamentalist. And now there is the danger that Islamic fundamentalism will have more control. There's also a danger that the people now in control in Damascus are going to take revenge, not just on army people who behaved disgustingly and terribly and tortured and murdered many thousands. We're talking about over 550,000 people killed in this conflict since 2011. Much less than half of them are armed people. So huge civilian casualties and huge numbers locked up in jails. But also the Alawite community, which is the community of sort of, they're not exactly Shiites, they're not exactly non-Shiites, but they're closest to the Shia population, which is what Iran is. And these people are in the West, and they were the people who were being benefited by the Assad regime. Assad was, of course, both Assads, the father and the son, were Alawites, and it's likely that the Alawites will be victimized because, in fact, the way that hardline Sunni Muslims see Alawites is almost as if they are devil worshippers and not Islamic at all. So they are likely to face the brunt of the recriminations.
One moment they're the elite, and the next moment they're in the gutter. That is the situation in Syria. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk about Russia in more detail here, because what price do you think Putin will exact on Assad? Because he saved his life, and now effectively he's some sort of hostage in Moscow. He's a hostage to Putin's fortune. He's hardly going to go around and invite him for dinner. He's a bit of a liability, isn't he? But of course Russia does host a number of ex-dictators and has given them refuge. The Belarusian leader of old is also in Moscow. And the other question is, now that Russia is being forced out with its tail between its legs, will it be able perhaps to redeploy some of those energies and forces towards the war in Ukraine?
Well, I don't think it's going to make a major difference to the war in Ukraine, number one. And I've spent a lot of time in Ukraine also in the last 2.5 years, in fact 8 trips to Ukraine. I was in Ukraine when the war started with Israel and Gaza, because October the 7th a year ago, I was there for other reasons, and suddenly I realized that I was in the wrong war, actually.
Right.
But I've focused most of my attention since then on the war in the Middle East. So I don't think it's going to affect, I don't think the Russians are going to suddenly find they've got huge surplus of forces to deploy in Ukraine. But I do think it's going to have a major effect on their psychology of Putin. Because I think Putin realizes now that, you know, things that appeared to be cemented and working well can suddenly deteriorate. This is going to have an effect on the way Putin conducts himself. And secondly, I think that that you're right in suggesting that Assad will now be seen by Putin as a liability rather than an asset. The only way he could possibly utilize Assad sitting in Moscow would be to try and arrange some kind of defense of his base in Tartus, the naval base. And maybe the Alawites would still listen to their ex-leader, Assad. But I tend to think that Putin is ruthless enough to get rid of Assad pretty quickly.
How, I mean, when you say get rid of him...
I'm not suggesting he might meet with a similar accident to Mr. Prigozhin
but
and
just
others.
just sort of sideline him.
Sideline him completely. In fact, the reports are suggesting that he's been already told he's not allowed to leave Moscow.
Right.
And he can't travel beyond the realm of Moscow. And there's even talk, and I don't have any evidence to prove it, that his wife, who is British, of course...
That's right.
may be thinking that it's about time to jump ship and divorce him and apply to come back to Britain. I read this in the papers today. I have no idea if it's true, but put it this way, it wouldn't surprise me.
If she did come back to this country, there would be a great interview for you, and at least you'd only be able to need to get on the tube to Chiswick Starbucks to get her.
Well, I'd try and get her. I'd try to get her before she got to Britain. That's the ideal. You always have to be one step ahead if you're an independent foreign correspondent.
As you always are. Paul Martin is one of the quickest thinkers on his feet that I know, and boy oh boy, he has to be. You've heard briefly where he's been over the last few years: in Ukraine, in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon and Syria. We'll hear more from this intrepid correspondent around the world right here with me, Jonny Gould, at Talk. Stay tuned.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a warm welcome to your Christmas Eve. It is still Christmas Eve. We are a matter of 1 hour and 37 minutes away from the big one, the Christmas Day. Now, of course, I've got a bit of an issue here with Christmas Eve lasts from about November the 1st, doesn't it? Because you start hearing Slade even before, you know, the sun goes down at 6 o'clock. And Christmas Eve is intended just to be 24 hours, but it's in fact 24 days. And Christmas is a 12-day festival. And people seem to think that by the 27th it's over, but actually, by the time your kids go back to school on January the 6th, it's still going on. Christmas is 12 days. And I have this feeling that I think we should celebrate Christmas. I mean, I have enjoyed Christmas this year, Paul. I'll tell you why. Because it's been a break from wokery. It's been an opportunity for Britain to reconnect with its traditional values. And I don't just mean Christian values, I mean its Britishness. And I must admit, that break from the normal drudgery of news provision, I've enjoyed that as well. What do you think to that?
Well, yes, I think it's important to emphasise the Britishness of Britain, obviously.
Hear, hear.
I agree with you 100%. While wars are going on, of course, in different parts of the world, in Ukraine and in particular in the Middle East, it's difficult to feel in a great celebratory mood.
Well, that's right.
For somebody like me, because I'm a journalist and I'm covering these wars. But you know, the funny thing, if I can slightly divert from what you're saying, is that when you are a journalist, you don't always view things, as it were, as a moral issue. You're saying, how do I get the best story out of these situations?
Yes.
And you would, even when I interview people, even if they're the most hard-line and radical, I've interviewed some extremely radical people, but obviously from Idi Amin to Yasser Arafat to Ratko Mladic of the military leader of
Ismail Haniyeh, rather famously.
I can run through a whole list of them. And while I'm doing the interview, I'm not trying to find any moral attack on the person. I'm trying to extract from the person what it is he has to say, what he's really thinking, try to draw out what he really thinks. Afterwards, people can analyse what I've said or what he said and work out what he's really like. But I don't sit there trying to trap them or trick them. And the same thing applies with the current war. I'm not sitting there trying to draw moral conclusions all the time as to who's right and who's wrong. I'm there to report the facts and let others decide. So that's the way I see things.
I've got one for you then, which is about Christmas, and that is that about a year and a half ago, Zelensky decided to proclaim that the Russian Orthodox Christmas, which I think is around January the 6th, he decided to observe the Catholic and Anglican Christmas, which is December the 25th, which is clearly a political decision to look west rather than look east.
That's true.
So that was interesting, wasn't it?
That was interesting, and he's trying to get away from the Russian Orthodox Church. There is an Orthodox Church very strong in Ukraine, but the church itself is split between those who are pro-Russian Orthodox and anti-Russian Orthodox.
Right.
And he's trying to emphasize the anti-Russian part of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine.
Can you be an Orthodox Christian and celebrate Christmas on the 25th?
Well, I mean, they do.
They do. They just do.
They now do.
They now do. But, I mean, the first thing I thought when I heard that story was that this was clearly an attempt by Ukraine to look west for its political and religious survival. And yet, I believe that Russia views the churches in Ukraine as some of the most important in its birthright of its Orthodox Church, in Kiev, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kiev was seen by the Russians as being the birthplace of not just the Church of Russia, but the whole of Russia.
Right, goodness.
So that it saw that from the 11th century, I think it is. So it goes back a long way, and that's one of the reasons why the Russians feel they ought to own Kiev, or Kyiv, which is why this war is so deep-seated.
Oh man, you're right. It's heavy stuff. I just want to ask you about the psychological effects on you. I mean, you're a tough guy, and you're very logical and very moral in your reporting, but do you have days where you think, this is such mind-blowingly difficult? I mean, or are you just not built that way?
No,
Does it get you down in the solace of your own home? You know, when you go home and you think, oh, I'm at peace, I'm here with my missus, it's lovely. You know, the kids are fine. And then I think, why am I going there? Does it get to you sometimes?
It definitely gets to me. I can remember being in Bosnia, for example, the war in Bosnia between 1992 and 1995. I covered that extensively. And there it was even more difficult to understand as a war. And that really worried me because, in fact, there were three groups, all from exactly the same ethnic origin.
Yeah.
One had been more, the Croats had been more Catholic, and then you have the Muslims who weren't that Muslim to start with, but they were classified as Muslims because they'd been occupied, that area had been occupied by Turkey for centuries. And then there was the Serbian Orthodox who were affiliated with Serbia and Montenegro, and they were actually the same ethnic group, and they were busy fighting each other and killing each other. They'd been neighbours, in some cases literally opposite each other.
Scary.
And I even heard Ratko Mladic talking to the opposite side on the walkie-talkies that they had used in the Yugoslav army, which were both working, and saying to somebody else, saying, "Oh, how's your wife and how are the kids and so on? We'll be attacking you in another half hour." And it went. This is the kind of war.
Yeah.
And you start to think, what is this world about? Are we a bunch of atoms spinning around who are going to disintegrate into nothingness, or is there something in religion where we are under some other kind of bigger force that's determining the future? So I would go home and start thinking about the wider question of why are we here?
Absolutely. You touched on something very important. What was this war about? The breakdown of Yugoslavia, and indeed their histories within those tribal wars were exacerbated, and difference was created when perhaps Yugoslavia was the lid which was kept on top of the simmering ethnic fights. 03444991000. In just a moment, we'll talk in more detail about Paul's recent trips to Lebanon, Syria, and it wouldn't be a foreign trip for Paul if he wasn't banged up. I'm being serious. We'll hear about that in just a moment. Stay tuned. Christmas Eve, Jonny Gould right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Oh, and a very good morning. Not yet. I was just testing. A very good evening. It's Jonny Gould right here on Talk. And John in Sutton has tweeted, and it's great to re-engage with my old mates on early breakfast and across the schedule, as always. Welcome to the show, John in Sutton. Johnny, I agree with you when you say Christmas is a break from wokery. I'm enjoying every minute of it. Merry Christmas, and a Merry Christmas to you, John, as well. I just think that it's been extremely pleasant to hear I know, like any other year, to hear the same records again and again, but actually to hear people celebrating Christmas at whatever level of Christianity it might be. It might be completely secular. Of course, Christmas is also about presents. It's also about family. But, you know, those are Christian values in themselves, aren't they? 03444991000. We're going to talk about Grinches in the final. Who are your Christmas Grinches? Good evening, Johnny. This is from Rachel. I'd have to say Rachel Reeves is my Christmas Grinch. Firstly, because she's giving Rachels everywhere a bad name. You're called Rachel, of course. And secondly, she's now taking the treatment they need first. Okay, that's very interesting. And good to see and hear you again on Talk. Happy Christmas, Greg and Carol. Thank you very much. I'm not on tomorrow. No, I'm back in on Boxing Day, so I shall be bringing the props, including turkey sandwiches right up to here, that we didn't finish on Christmas Day, and enjoying them with you, however early it is in the day, at 10 o'clock in the morning, so stay tuned right here on Talk. And in a moment, we're going to talk to Barry in Hornchurch, who wants to talk to Paul. But Paul, you've been in Lebanon and in Syria. You told me about the 26 days that you were banged up by Ismail Haniyeh in Gaza, despite the fact that you were on cordial terms with the assassinated leader of Gaza, who was on a trip to Tehran at the time. But of course, you were banged up again, this time by Hezbollah.
Okay, well...
Is that right?
Yeah, they're two separate things. The first...
we'll talk about... Yes, please, tell us...
The first was Gaza.
This is a mad story.
That was in 2010. I had spent a lot of time in Gaza because as a journalist I'd covered the Intifada, the uprising that had started in 2000, 2001 in various formations. I'd been back and forward to Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, Egypt, that whole region. So...
Where did you stay in Gaza?
Oh, by the way, in a very nice private hotel.
Right.
Very pleasant. In fact, I got interviewed. The first time I went there, I got interviewed by the owner of the hotel, whose brother, I think, was the mayor. And she only allowed people to stay there who she approved of. So you had to be first interviewed by the lady of the hotel, and then I got the approval, apparently, and so I was allowed to stay there when I went there.
I'm an international correspondent. I'm here to cover events in Gaza.
Yeah. There was also a lovely hotel on the beach, which I occasionally stayed at. People think Gaza was always a hellhole. It's not true. Actually, Gaza was quite a pleasant place on the Mediterranean. It's true it had a lot of refugees in the sense that they were usually descendants of refugees, people who had been either moved out of their own villages or towns during the conflict between Israel and the then Palestinian entity, because Palestine, of course, was run by Britain and as a mandate until 1947.
Would it be better to call them Arabs or South Syrians?
Yes, they were of Arab origin,
yeah.
and
they weren't Palestinians as such, were they?
Well, technically they were living in Palestine, which was a mandate, but of course the Jews were also
Palestinians.
Indeed.
Yes.
The Jerusalem Post, as it now exists, was then called the Palestine Post, run by the Jews. So anyway, so these people had been living in Gaza, and they were given refugee status, but they weren't really refugees. They were living in rather low-class housing generally. Right. But a lot of them had done quite well in the world and so on and so forth. And the place wasn't an awful place at all to live in. It became worse when Hamas took over, and then there were boycotts and activities against Hamas by the Western states as well as by Israel and Egypt. And it became somewhat worse. And then, of course, every time they started firing rockets into Israel, and it happened at various stages, there would be some retaliation, things would get worse, then they'd start getting better, and so on and so forth. So Gaza was an interesting place to report from, and that's why I used to keep going there. However, in 2008, I was filming a rocket-firing group, firing rockets into Israel, into Sderot, it's a town close to the border, from Gazan territory. Now, some people would say, well, isn't that immoral to be encouraging these people to fire rockets? They were firing rockets basically at civilian areas because they didn't have proper control of the rockets. So they were going to kill civilians. I decided that I'm a mirror, and my job is to reflect what's reality, the reality that's going on. Not to be a convex or a concave mirror, but to be a straight, flat mirror. If they're already firing rockets, my presence is not going to make a difference as to how many rockets they fire. If they were deliberately firing rockets to show off in front of the Western media, I would never allow that. But I went to film this event, and one of the young people who was firing the rockets, in fact, he was on his first rocket firing mission, was well educated, spoke well, and I've seen militants, terrorists, whatever you like to call them, in various parts of the world, many conflicts, not just the ones I've mentioned, quite a few more, and very few of them are well educated. Maybe their bosses might be better educated, but the ones that are the cannon fodder are not. And here he was speaking very well and very educated, good English, etc. And he said he'd had a wonderful time firing these rockets and would do it again, and so on and so forth. When we got back to our base in Gaza City, from the border, my taxi driver, by the way, had decided to leave in the middle of this very sensibly, because he realized that the Israelis have a habit of retaliating when you fire rockets. Sure. So anyway, we survived, and the same person tapped me on the shoulder a year and a half later, when I'd got back just after a really big clash between Israel and the Gazans, and I was allowed in just the second day that the ceasefire had taken place, and he said, "It's Mohammed," which didn't limit the field very much. There were quite a few of those. And I said, "Oh yes, I remember you, Mohammed. You were the rocket firing guy that was firing rockets. I've come here to continue the filming I'm making to see what happened in this war. So I'd like to know from your militant group what happened." He said, "I'm not a member of any militant group." So I said, "Well, hang on, you were. I filmed you firing rockets." He said, "Yes, but I've resigned." Now, you can't resign from a militant group in any war, but particularly that kind of war. You know where the weaponry's held, and you know what's going on, you know who's who. You can't resign. It's like, I suppose, you could probably resign from this job, but they probably wouldn't. They'd hunt after you, but they probably wouldn't kill you, right? But
I actually think this is the Hotel California. You know, I can quit, but I can never leave.
Yeah, I thought
seems to have been here. I've been here since the 90s.
I thought you might be a relic. I thought, yeah. But in any case, seriously, I mean, I should not make light jokes like this, but he was in danger. The fact that he had left his militant group put him in danger. Yes. He said, "I want you to make a film about why I've left my group," which I thought was extremely silly of him, because I said, "You'll be in worse danger." He said I couldn't be in worse danger. In fact, he could be. So I'll try and keep the story very short from now on.
Yes.
He was locked up, eventually by the rulers of Gaza, which was Hamas, and he was accused of being a spy and was going to be sentenced to death. That was the inevitable consequence of being accused of being a spy. 26, 27 others had been killed shortly before that. I thought I might be able to save his life if I came and gave evidence. I'd gone back to London by then, and say, look, why would a spy want to make a film with a Western correspondent about why he has left his militant group? Why would he have left the group in the first place? Wouldn't he continue to spy on it? And why would he want a film made? He's not a spy, he's a dissident. Now, being a dissident is a very bad thing if you're running Gaza. And I said, maybe give him 10 years, maybe I could save his life. Was it my job as a journalist to do that? I felt, on the one hand, I could say he was old enough to make his own mind up about why he wanted to make a film. It's his consequence. But on the other hand, I felt I should try to save his life. So when I went to Gaza to give evidence in his military trial, they had a proper military trial behind closed doors, they said, "No, you're not giving evidence because you are not a witness, you are an accused." I said, "Accused of what?" They said, "You are accused of being Mohammed's spy master."
Right.
Now, I realized I was in a bit of trouble at that point. I mean, nice to be promoted to being a master, but, but this was serious. And anyway, for 26 days I was locked up, I was held in solitary, I was given 2 mock executions, a number of things happened. Eventually, fortunately, I was able to be released, and that was because I was a kind of well-known journalist. And I thought to myself much later, many years later, after my release, when all this happened on October the 7th, a year and a quarter ago, I was thinking, these poor people, who 251 of them were taken into Gaza, they don't have that kind of backing. I was a journalist, I was also trained in the ability to handle tough situations. I knew there could always be an occupational hazard in the job. And these people, of course, have been left there with no future. There was a negotiation that released some of them. So I felt some sympathy for them, even though I'm a journalist and should be neutral. So and I've been interviewing a lot of the people who've been either released or the families of those who are or are not released. And that has been quite turmoil causing in my own psyche, because I'm thinking back of what happened to me and then thinking of these people who were locked up in Gaza and are still there. And that does make one feel pretty
vulnerable. What might have happened during a different time if this had happened at a different place? We're going to take a call now. Barry from Hornchurch is on the line talking about relative safety in Syria these days. Good evening, Barry, or through to Paul.
Oh, good evening, Johnny, and Chanukah Sameach to you.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Paul, you've led an amazing life, and what that story, you're such a brave individual. What I'd like to know about, actually, is it's not so much Syria, but one country you haven't mentioned is Jordan. And I can see similarities in that in Jordan you've got Christians just the same as Syria, and whereas in Syria it was the Alawites in charge, in Jordan it's the Hashemites. Basically, how safe is the king and the royal family and the government in Jordan, and are they susceptible at all to an Islamist takeover?
Well, they've had huge threats since the king was appointed, King Abdullah, originally. You must remember that he was originally a Saudi. In fact, the royal family of Jordan was imposed on that area, partly by the British, accepting a Saudi king, and they regard themselves as the custodians of the holy place of Jerusalem, for example. And in fact, they ran the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, including the old city of Jerusalem, from 1948 to 1967. And I have to say, didn't do a very good job of using that opportunity to create, first of all, a Palestinian state. They could have done so if they'd wanted to. And secondly, of making Jerusalem something extremely important. They only became obsessed with Jerusalem, actually, when they lost it in 67. But in terms of the Christians of Jordan, yes, there was a large number of Christians, but there are far, far more Muslims, and some of them are of the Bedouin Muslims, and some of them are Palestinians who had moved into what used to be the eastern part of the original plan for Palestine, which became Transjordan, and they're the majority. So the majority of people living in Jordan are actually Sunni Muslims who originated from the area we now think of as Palestine, Israel. So don't know if that helps to explain anything. Right. Yes, they are in danger in the sense that the whole population of Christians right throughout the Middle East has been radically reduced in the last 70, 80 years. The only country there, the Christians have not been losing numbers significantly, happens ironically to be Israel.
Of course, where they are living in freedom and in full democratic rights alongside Jewish and Muslim neighbours. Paul Martin, fantastic conversation. Thank you very much indeed for joining us right here on Talk. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always a pleasure to sit down with you and talk.
Thank you very much indeed, and I hope that next time there will be nothing to talk about, because the Middle East will be a place of peace and tranquility.
If only there were more Paul Martins to help that along. Paul Martin with us, thank you very much indeed. This is Jonny Gould on Talk, and in a moment we're going to go to the movies with Van Connor. Will you stay tuned? I'm sure you will. Here it is.
UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On the app. On your mobile. The home of common sense. This is...
Well, wasn't that a terrific discussion with Paul Martin? He's returning to Syria, and he's got ambitions, as you'd expect, to even try and interview Shamima Begum. And if he does, you'll hear about it here on Talk. Fingers crossed that Paul will get that. You never know. With his intrepid travels and his track record, nothing would surprise me more. 03444991000. Let's go to the movies now. And from reality to fantasy. And I understand that it's not a fancy dress competition, but Van Connor is certainly going to win it tonight, hands down. Van, welcome. Goodness me.
Evening, Johnny. I'm sorry, you kind of caught me off balance here. This all got lined up this afternoon, and I already had plans in motion, so I kind of couldn't skip the wardrobe choices. And it's led to a wonderful comedic moment where I've gotten to follow up Paul Martin, of course, dressed as an elf, talking about the literal land of make-believe. So
yes, which we all wish for after what we've heard Paul talk about, indeed. For those of us listening on the radio, Van is dressed in a very fetching elf outfit. No jokes about health and safety right here on Talk. Van, should we talk about all the big movies that are going? My kids and my wife went to see Wicked the other day, and the first shock about it was, apparently the music is great and everything, and it's being played on the radio as well, is that it's 2 hours and 40 minutes. But my kids, who are in single-digit ages, were not bored. They stuck with it. It's got a high attention span, this one.
I'll be honest with you, I can't understand it, because I was bored to tears. I thought it was
really? You didn't like
bad.
it?
I mean, it's not Cats bad, but I thought it was pretty bad.
Really? Why?
And it's for one thing, it's 3 minutes longer, I think. The first part of the movie, part 1 of 2, is 3 minutes longer than the entire stage show. I am intrigued enough to want to see the second part, because I know what comes in the plot. And I am genuinely quite intrigued by the whole, Baum, Oz kind of universe in literature. Like, Oz always intrigued me. I'm a big fan of Sam Raimi's one from 2013. I just found the Wicked movie just a bit grating and a bit, for one thing, very grey. Like, I just thought it didn't do much with colour. I thought it's a very grey, very dull-looking movie, despite the fact that, it's Oz. It's the most vibrant and popping Technicolor environment in the history of cinema. They literally marketed Technicolor on the movie that inspired this, and yet you've got a movie that really is quite difficult to see at times.
Right, okay.
And centres around the idea that its central protagonist has bright green skin, which is nuts to me. There's then also the fact that, right, it's the first movie since Grease, I think, that's been so brazen with hiring people who are pushing 40 to play teenagers. And I say that having acted, because I actually at one point had to look up how old Cynthia Erivo was, and found out that she's 3 years older than Stockard Channing was in Grease.
Oh, wow.
And yet we all to this day ridicule Stockard Channing in Grease for being like a middle-aged woman and being a teenager, and yet Cynthia Erivo's older. That's
so funny. So how old was John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John in Grease? Were they in their 30s?
I think they were. I believe he was younger. I think he was in his late 20s. I think she was early 30s. Yeah. I believe. And Stockard Channing, I remember, was about 36.
Right. So. Fair play. All these 17-year-olds doing the most fantasy A levels in a school which didn't seem to do any studying at all. Now back to the script, and we're going to watch Mufasa, the Lion King.
Yes, I had the pleasure.
I was hoping to find my pride.
What happened to him?
The outsiders happened. A few of us got away, but you're the only other lions I've seen. You two better keep moving.
Wait, please. My name is Taka, son of Obasi. I know what it's like to lose everything. Come with us. We can help you.
I don't need any help.
But you don't have anyone.
She does indeed have someone. Thank you very much.
That's Zazu. Don't eat him.
You heard her. Do not eat me. As a recent addition to the King's Royal Guard, I must kindly ask you both to move on. Thank you for stopping by.
Your king hired a bird to protect you.
How high can you fly?
Van,
Explain.
So this is a prequel of sorts. It's both a sequel and a prequel to the 2019 live-action adaptation of The Lion King, which at the time was done by Jon Favreau, who had previously directed Jungle Book, the movie that kind of popularized this whole live-action adaptation thing. We've now got a prequel-sequel hybrid from Barry Jenkins, who directed Moonlight and If Beale Street Can Talk. The central premise here is that the character who is the child of Simba and Nala, the king and queen at the end of the previous movie, is being told a bedtime story, evidently by Rafiki, in the presence of Timon and Pumbaa. So you have some returning players from the first movie. In fact, there's quite a few. Like Beyonce returns, for instance, as Nala, Donald Glover as Simba. And they tell Kiara, the young daughter, who incidentally is voiced and portrayed by Blue Ivy Carter, Beyonce's real-life daughter, in her first acting role. They tell her the story of Mufasa and how he came to become the king of Pride Rock. It turns out that he's not part of a great lineage that was sort of always implied. He actually was an orphan who was sort of elected to the position. It is this story of, it's not who you are, it's not who you are by blood, it's who you are by spirit, kind of a story. And at the same time, you also get the two best friends, a sort of very much a Ben-Hur type story, where the adopting brother, who actually is the son of the king, who will go on to become Scar, obviously has to then become the one who gets rejected and does the Shakespearean turn along the way. It's very good, actually. It suffers from intense prequelitis, but it's very good, I have to say.
Van, do you think... I mean, that sounds really a complicated idea which they've successfully communicated to you and you're able to tell us. Do you think the idea of it's not about your blood, it's about your spirit? I mean, do you think lines and ideas in movies are more complicated than they used to be?
Oh, no, I don't think there's anything in Lion King Mufasa. Sorry, Mufasa, the Lion King. I keep calling it Lion King Mufasa. Yeah. I don't think there's anything there that's particularly any more challenging than... Because obviously I grew up, I was in my sort of like childhood sort of peak, really, for Disney movies, around the time of what we now refer to as the Disney Renaissance, when you had basically that run from Little Mermaid through to Pocahontas. You know, the ones where they started to win Oscars and things like that. And I would argue, actually, that The Lion King Mufasa is less challenging than a lot of the ideals of, for instance, Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast, which I think was slightly more complex. If there's any real complexity to this, I think it comes in the narrative gymnastics of, again, the prequelitis. Like you have to explain a sort of cool way of avoiding the... I was Jeff, but now you will know me as Scar.
Okay, so it's all that prequel stuff. So listen, we've just got enough time to go and talk about Better Man. Let's watch a bit of that. So that amazing cornucopia at the bottom end of Regent Street as it comes into Trafalgar Square, Leicester Square, is extraordinary, because that is Robbie Williams as a monkey.
Yeah.
I mean, what a movie, what a crazy idea.
Yeah, it's nuts, and it works. It absolutely works. It's from Weta Digital, the company that made the visual effects for the Planet of the Apes prequels, the Andy Serkis ones, Rise, Dawn, and War of, and Kingdom quite recently as well. So it's based on that. It's a really interesting, it's a fun movie, first of all, because it's basically Rocket Man for Robbie Williams. Right. It uses his music in very much the same way that Rocket Man used Elton John's, which is it's not chronological, but it's plot relevant when they drop these things. And it's just a very fun, very engaging, very fun movie. It's from the director of The Greatest Showman. It's his second movie. Yeah. He evidently was like Robbie Williams' best mate.
How about that? I mean, it's an amazing idea, and I think it propels Robbie Williams into superstar status, doesn't it? Van Connor, thank you very much for previewing all the stuff you can see at Christmas. Merry Christmas. Claire Muldoon next. This is...
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Oh, Merry Christmas to you. It's Jonny Gould in the chair between now and 1 o'clock. I am literally going to sleigh ride you into Christmas Day, for I am here until 1 o'clock. And the news never stops. There's no physical papers on December the 25th, as you know, because all the news agents, most of them are shut, and you can't distribute papers through vans. However, in the world of PDF and internet, the newspaper industry never sleeps, so we're going to have news headlines all the way through Christmas Day. And so who better to go through it with me than my old mate? It's Claire Muldoon.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you very much.
It's specifically important. Thank you very much for coming in at this moment. I have a predisposition to inviting Catholics on at this time. My friend Ed Adu came in a few years ago. He's a Catholic as well, and I invited him on Christmas Eve. Of course, it's midnight mass, but what I learned apparently is you don't have to celebrate it or commemorate it or worship it at midnight. You've already been.
I've already been. I've already fulfilled my Christmas obligation with my 4 kids, so that was absolutely wonderful.
That's so nice. And
luckily for them, Santa can come at any time.
Well, he's got a shift, hasn't he?
They're of an age.
Are they?
I'll just leave it hanging there.
They may not believe in it anymore?
Oh, I'm not saying that. Of course they Of course they believe, yes. Johnny. I still believe.
I'd like to think that as we get older, we regress a little bit and start believing in things that we were cynical about.
Oh, never cynical about the gift of Christ, or the gift of giving, or the gift of Christmas, surely.
No. Good, thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
So just, so hang on, what physical time can you start Mass on the 24th? Can you start at sort of lunchtime?
No. So any vigil Mass, this is the same for Sunday worship as well.
Right.
As long as it's after 6 p.m. the night before.
Right.
It counts towards...
The evening comes.
Yeah. We can have the subsequent consecutive days Mass the night before.
That makes entire sense.
Yeah.
Because in Jewish festivals, of course, they all start the
on
evening
Friday
before.
On the
evening before.
Everything.
Yes, Yom Kippur does.
Which is your New Year?
No, well, the week before is New Year. It's
right.
Rosh Hashanah is a week before. But of course, it starts the night before, like the Sabbath. It always starts on the Friday evening, and the same goes. Obviously for Christmas. And do you worship on Christmas morning? I mean, that must be a lovely time when the churches are full, is that right?
Well, the churches, tonight it was standing room only.
Really lovely.
It was absolutely packed.
How lovely is that?
Well, there's a lot of people, you can tell the people who don't regularly worship.
Well, that's also true.
Yeah, because they stand at the wrong times.
Talking.
They start talking, they leave at the wrong times, they stand at the wrong times, they don't sit down or they genuflect. And we're standing there like... very unchristian, very impatient of us going,
well, you can't be judgmental about your fellow believers.
And the ones that don't even know the words. So we're all in it together.
I know.
Yeah.
I know what you mean, because of course festivals like Yom Kippur, you get the, twice a year.
Is that a movable feast?
It's quite the opposite, because you're not allowed to eat. But yes, it is a lunar festival, so it's because it moves around a bit like Easter moves around, because it uses the former calendar, the lunar calendar.
Yeah.
So yes, and you can tell the people who pop around. Sometimes they've got unfathomably long hair, and crazy faces. But yes, look, everyone's a believer. Everyone's there for a reason.
Yeah.
And people are compelled to come to church or synagogue or mosque because at some level they may not have had the education or the background, but they believe in it. They're not there as tourists. So we can't really cast aspersions even on people who are less educated in the religion than perhaps we are.
Can we not?
Can we not? No, maybe not.
You've spoiled my Christmas already, Johnny.
I'm trying to be open and inclusive. I'm trying to be.
What prayers for all? Thoughts and prayers.
Oh yeah, is that silly? Am I being a bit of a snowflake?
Yeah, it's just a bit. We need to wake you up, lad. Wake you up.
Oh, so tell me about Christmas morning. I mean, is that it's not quite as important a worship as the vigil mass?
It is. All masses are important.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Are they all called masses as well?
Yes.
Right. Is Sunday morning called a mass as well?
some parishes have got 6 masses
Right.
to fulfil the Sunday obligation,
Right.
or to fulfil the feast.
And 6 masses are sort of morning
The
prayers.
vigil. No, they're not prayers. They're all services. They all witness the transubstantiation of the blood and the body, the blood and the bread, the wine and the bread being changed into, we believe, the body and blood of Christ.
So what do you make of the 20th century marketing of Christmas for it to become something else for so many people?
Well, of course, with capitalism and with everything else, it has become so commercialised. And even getting a stamp, I always get the religious stamps. This year, Royal Mail, in their supreme wonder, have ordered stamps of cathedrals. I think there was Durham, Liverpool, Edinburgh, and of either Church of England, Church of Scotland, or Catholic. There's only one Catholic, I think, out of all the stamps. But for me, Christmas, the clue is in the name. It's about Christ. It's about the birth of Christ. And there's nothing nicer to say that than a nativity set. But even if you go into Catholic schools, or if you speak with young Catholic families, a lot of them don't appreciate really what the time is about. And the time is about the birth of Christ. And for us, it is the start and the foundation of our religion, our beliefs and our faith. And a quick quiz question. I don't know if you'd know the answer to this, actually, Johnny, but what year did Jesus die?
Well, he was 33, wasn't he? So my obvious guess, which is probably wrong, it would be AD 33.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
There you are.
Wow. I've seen
almost hallelujah.
Well, I'm quite happy with that answer. Thank you for saying I'm correct. I'm delighted with a little bit of knowledge. So this is really important. The message of Christmas. I know you'll agree with me here. I said this at the beginning of the show. I said I'm really enjoying the Christmas period because this is a time when British people, and I say England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales,
the collective union,
reconnecting with their Christianity at whatever level they worship at, whether they are completely...
I hope that's true.
And it's a break from wokery.
Yeah.
Because you can't help, even hearing the Slade song, right? It is about Christmas. He says Christmas in the song. He shouts it. And yes, it's about giving Christmas, but it's also about family, and it's looking to the future. It's only just begun. All these messages, these Judeo-Christian messages, there's Jewish messages in there as well, that actually it is overwhelming, and it's like a reset of our values, and long may it continue.
Well,
I like it.
I hope it's a reset also of peace on earth.
Oh, man. That's a big shout. It's not, is it?
Well, if everyone practiced their faith and their religion and joy, they really ought to be peace on earth.
Yeah, I mean, amen. That's what I'd say to that. However, there's a version of peace called quiet, which is, I think, probably the most realistic way of talking about when the world's not at war, quiet between peoples.
Wow.
What do you think? I mean, quiet is probably the more realistic thing that we hope for in 2025.
I would rather go for peace. I would rather go for understanding. I would rather go for, a brokerage, a deal, a ceasefire, a stop of innocents losing their lives, man-made evil to stop. Because the devil's out there, the devil's real, it is real evil, it's horrible. Yeah. And it's God-given man free will that's causing all of this. Yes. Power, corruption, control.
Yes. It's a tough world, and I knew we'd sort of get on this, but that's the only way we can talk about peace. We have to tackle the ugly stuff in order to reach peaceful settlement. It's the King's Speech tomorrow as well, 3 o'clock kick-off. Now, I'm often a few sherries over the line when I hear it, but I always make an appointment to hear what he's got to say. And apparently it's not in Windsor, it's not in Buckingham Palace, it's down at that church just by Wardour Street, by Wells Street in the West End of London. There is a church which is built inside a square. I think it's called Pearson Square, which is full of the most expensive flats you've ever seen in your puff. And you walk through and it's a private estate. But in the middle of this beautiful square, very modern square, is a church which obviously has been maintained. And that's where he's recorded his King's speech.
That's a bit odd.
Yeah, it's new. Apparently it's the first time it's been outside of one of the royal palaces for about 15 years. And we kind of know what he's going to say.
What's he going to say, Johnny?
He's going to talk about national healing.
What, in a homeopathic kind of way?
Well, let's have a look. Let's read it. Charles chooses ex-hospital... I'm on the Daily Mail, yeah. Charles has chosen an ex-hospital chapel for speech praising health workers and how the nation came together after the summer riots.
All about the optic, isn't it?
Yes. And, of course, he'll reflect on his difficult year for his family following the 2 shock cancer diagnoses, as well as others who have suffered in the UK.
I don't know why he's so shocked about it. 1 in 2 of us will experience cancer in our lifetimes.
I know, but Princess Catherine's only young.
Doesn't matter how old you are.
I know, but in the olden days... Do you remember when young people didn't get cancer?
No.
No, it's much more prevalent than it used to be. Isn't it? Yes.
Well...
Do you not think so? Let's take a straw poll of the gallery tonight.
Only because of the diagnosis.
Is it more prevalent? Is cancer more prevalent amongst young people? I have lost friends to cancer in their 40s and 50s. Over and over and over, in a way that wasn't there 20 years ago.
I think it's because of the diagnosis now.
Really? Do you think just we're faster with diagnoses?
Yeah, and people are faster going to Dr. Google and then going to present those symptoms that have made them fit to GPs, if they can see the GP. But that's another old full can of worms. But on the King, right, he is the head of the Church of England, and anyone that's watched Wolf Hall, Mirror in the Light, will know that it's not been a completely easy task for the Church of England to, you know, break away. Well, it was actually, because Cromwell was a mastermind, to break away and move that. And then, you know, he is the head of the church, but we know William isn't a great fan of religion. So I wonder if through William then we won't be a monarchist, perhaps we will become a republic. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a fascinating thing. I mean, William has been given the job of being head of the Anglican Church.
Has he?
Isn't he?
No, the King is.
When he's...
Well, yeah, when
I'm
he
saying when he
succeeds.
assumes the role.
Yeah.
I went to an Anglican church service out of interest at the end of the Sabbath, i.e. it was 8 o'clock at night. And it was rather similar to what I experienced in synagogue, in the sense that they did prayers for those who are ill, for a full, healthy recovery, which we do in synagogue. And then in the tradition in synagogues is to always pray for the royal family, wherever we are in the world. Yes. And
but that would only be British Jews that would do that.
British and Commonwealth, but also you would have prayers in France for, you know, the welfare of the Republic, and you would have prayers even for the new Jewish community, which is growing in Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, and in the United Arab Emirates. Yes, because there is a new kind of tolerance. I am in contact, I am friends with something called the Chief Rabbi of Saudi Arabia. He really exists.
Goodness gracious me.
And he is someone who is...
Was he born in Saudi Arabia?
No, he's
a convert, no?
No, he's a proper, I think he's either American or European Jewish rabbi who lives in Saudi.
Fantastic.
He is currently in Syria trying to negotiate with the parties. On behalf of the Saudis.
I'll pray for him.
I swear, I said that to him. I pray for you.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say about the Anglicans, and you talk about William not being interested when actually it's his duty to head the church.
Yeah, it will be.
Very, very important job, because it is the consensus of the country, which in a sense he's defending.
Well, they
would for religions that we're not Anglicans.
But the Anglicans would say that they are descendants of God.
Yes. Okay, so here's something fascinating. After they'd done the prayer for the ill, and please get well soon, God will look after you, hopefully, with our prayers. They then went on, and I was astounded. I had to ask the priest afterwards. He said something like, Lord, we thank you for letting us pray here in freedom, because we know around the world as Christians are under a great deal of pressure. So thank you, Lord, for being able to commune together and pray. And I thought, hang on, what church is this? Is this an anti-establishment? Is this a Catholic church, perhaps? And I said, what church is this? He said, it's Anglican. I said, you're the Church of England. You're the establishment church. He said, yes, but we don't take anything for granted. And that was the sort of prayer that we say in the royal family. We say, please put, the grace of God in your heart and the heart of all your councillors, in other words, the Prime Ministers, to be kind to us, a minority Jewish community. That's what we say. And I was astounded to hear that the Anglicans were saying it in a church in England. Who knew?
Who knew? You knew.
I knew. I found out. Did you say that in a Catholic church?
Well, in our prayers of the faithful, we pray for governments, and we pray for peace, and we pray for.
Do you pray for yourselves?
A lot. Well, the Mass can have a special intention for a parishioner or the people of the parish.
Yes.
So yes.
That's amazing. It is amazing how.
And we pray for the dead because we believe in purgatory.
Yes. Tell us what purgatory is exactly.
Purgatory is the steps between heaven and hell, and where you make up for your past life of sin.
Right. In that point, so the purgatory is the judgment.
Purgatory sometimes is called Westfield as well when you're Christmas shopping. It's Dante's.
You got me there.
I know.
Right, that's interesting.
It's Dante's fifth.
Right.
Straight to hell.
She's Claire Muldoon.
Yeah.
This is Talk. I'm Jonny Gould. Merry Christmas. We'll be right back.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And welcome along back to the show, 0344 499 1000. Book your call with Claire Muldoon, who's going through today's papers and some PDFs which are arriving as well for the news, which never stops, except the paper versions on Christmas Day. And we're all going to be sitting round and watching the last Gavin and Stacey. No, we're not. Yes, we are. The battle over the remote control has changed in the 21st century.
Hasn't it just?
Yeah.
Hasn't it just?
Yeah.
I don't know about your house, but streaming services like BBC iPlayer or ITVX, or which is quite clunky, is brilliant because you don't have to rearrange your Christmas day over like your prayer, worship, whatever service you go to. If you go to one, Christmas lunch, if you have a lunch, or if you have a Christmas dinner, it's the same food, by the way. It's the same menu. It's just different times, and depending on how sloshed the chef is. And you know, tomorrow we've got the end, is it, of Gavin and Stacey?
Yes.
The very, very, very last.
Yes.
Ever.
Yes.
Episode.
It's been years since the last
17
one.
years.
Yeah.
17 years.
And of course, that's quite a lot older, so they'll have to explain what's happened in the last 1.5 decades.
Which one's Gavin, which one's Stacey?
Exactly. Yeah.
Doctor Who.
Yes.
We've got Nicola Coughlan, the girl from Derry Girls.
Yes.
Bridgerton. I didn't watch Bridgerton. Did you?
No. Well, I mean, I gazed upon it because the missus likes it.
Oh.
You know.
But Nicola Coughlan from there, she's in it. The new Doctor Who, which I think would be good, because I like that lad who is the new Doctor Who. He's got a lovely Scottish Glaswegian lilt, even though he's not from there.
Isn't he?
He studied at the Scottish Conservatoire.
Really?
He used to be the
And that's how he got
RSAMD
it.
in Glasgow. I think.
You see, I can do a Glasgow accent.
No, you
only
can't, Johnny.
Only because,
No, you cannot.
Only because I can do an Alex Ferguson impression.
You can't. I've heard it before.
You have not heard me Alex impression.
I've heard you. You sound like Mrs. Doubtfire.
I'd take that as an enormous compliment.
Johnny, please don't. It's not meant as one.
No.
I think you have to do it now. I need to shame yourself.
It's not about that. It's got even the week. United got even the week. It's a Gorbals accent. It's a Gorbals. United are going to win the week.
He wasn't from the Gorbals. He was from Springburn.
Was he?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll actually. I'm going to put out. I shouldn't have done that.
No, you really ought not to.
Because I want to hear your Birmingham accent in revenge.
Birmingham.
That's terrible, isn't it? Absolutely terrible. Anyway.
Peaky Blinder.
Yeah.
Where was that one from?
Peaky Blinder. Good. We're really good at this. That's why we're in News and Current Affairs and not the new Mike Yarwood and Ronnie Ancona or what's her face.
What's the other guy? Rory Bremner. He was good.
He was good.
So is John Coleshaw.
John Coleshaw, fantastic.
Yeah.
He's very lucky.
Is he a Brummie?
No, but I was going to say, what's so clever about his accents is he is from approximately the epicentre of England. So he's from somewhere like Staffordshire. So he can do north and south.
Yeah.
Because in Stafford, right, if you go there, they sound half Black Country and half Mancunian.
They do, actually.
It's weird, isn't it?
That's so true.
And that's why he can talk funny and do an Ozzy Osbourne impression, which is probably my only good impression, because it's so authentic.
What, you're Ozzy Osbourne?
Yeah, well, because...
You're both from Birmingham.
Yeah, that's it.
West Bromwich Albion you support.
Aston Villa. Me and Ozzy, we're Villa fans.
I didn't know Aston Villa was in the Black Country.
No, it's not in the Black Country, it's in Birmingham. I'm from Birmingham, not Black Country.
Oh, right, OK.
Although I have a great affinity with the Black Country.
Oh, I'm mixed up now. I don't know about you.
No, because...
I'm really confused.
Well, the Black Country is...
Confused.com.
The Black Country is strictly speaking, Stourbridge and that area, but also it's also Wolverhampton and
lives in Stourbridge, near Malvern School. Tell me, what are your thoughts on 16-year-olds being able to vote?
Well, I find that any legislation that this Labour government are trying to change is just utterly politicised. On Boxing Day, I am going to delve deep into the worrying deficit of democracy when it comes to who is the police and crime commissioner around being mayor, because it is the mayor who automatically assumes the role. And because we have endured hate marches again and again and again, and Sadiq Khan in London has done nothing about it, I would like to see the police and crime commissioner being a different person from being the mayor. And so I'm going to talk to Peter Blexley on Boxing Day about that, because Peter actually said that if it was democratised, he would stand, and of course he would get my vote, because I do want someone separate from the mayor's office actually trying to bring law and order. And something else I'd like to see
but
is
the
that
Met brings the law and order with the Home Office, not Sadiq Khan.
Well, there's the thing, it's two
Mark
bosses.
Rowley is the head of the Met.
He is the head of the Met.
London Met.
And you can't decide, because it was Sadiq Khan who sacked the last one before Mark Rowley, Cressida Dick. But strictly speaking, the Home Secretary is the boss. So there's a sort of grey area about who is the boss. So that's a deficit.
Well, not
of
really,
democracy.
because the London Met funding doesn't come from the GLC.
I know, but in theory, the Home Office should be in charge of the Met, and Sadiq Khan did the sacking. And of course, the mayor role is only, 15 or 20 years old.
Does Andy Burnham wield that same power?
Yes, he does. The
in
police,
Manchester,
and
for the
that's
Manchester Met.
That's right, yes, they do. And this is
why
where...
then do Labour want more mayors and want to...
Because I think it's because they believe that Labour has strongholds in metropolitan areas, and they believe that they can always be elected in metropolitan areas.
Back to the 16-year-old vote.
This is, again, I think they believe that the majority of 16 to 18-year-olds are Labour voters, and they're probably right.
Well, you know who was the first one to bring that in?
Who dat?
My old pal, north of the border.
Who dat?
Who do you think?
I literally don't know. Who's you?
Jimmy Cranky, Elton John, Nicola Sturgeon herself.
Nicola Sturgeon did that?
Yeah.
Is she your mate?
Is she?
I didn't think so.
Oh, come on,
She's
Johnny.
being cynical.
Yeah, being tad ironic. She's blocked me on Twitter.
Has she? Congratulations.
Thank you. I know, I wear it as a badge of pride too. 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So she felt as well, because the SNP is quite a young party, and they want to ride on the crest of a wave of, the youth.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they're doing, and I think Labour are trying to do the same, and I think it's awful. And a chap wrote into the Times today saying, I actually think it's a great idea. He said, in fact, he said, I would even give every child the right to vote, as long as the parents had the responsibility for that vote. So therefore the parents would have 2 votes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you better vote this way.
Yeah.
That's not very democratic, is it?
No, it's not.
No,
but nor is giving 16-year-olds the vote. And I'll tell you something else.
Yeah.
Right, I live on my own, right, because the kids are all up now. My youngest is 20, he's still at uni. Having the 4 of them back home, sitting at the supper table now, completely different from when they were at home, under my roof, full time, studying, reading the good stuff, going to the theatre, everything else. Oh, Mum, I really think you're wrong. Have you thought about that? I'm sorry. What?
Oh.
What?
How do you feel about that?
I really don't like it.
No.
And we're supposed to be going to New York on New Year's Eve, Johnny, and I'll tell you, I think I might just go by myself.
Are they a bit woke?
I wouldn't say woke. They don't drink oat milk.
Right,
They're not that bad.
That's really bad for you, oat milk as well.
But, there's bordering...
You see...
Whereas a good tap on the legs used to sort them out, you see.
I'm finding, and I'm considerably older than your kids, I'm finding that I'm diverting from some of the beliefs that my mum believes in. We believe in kind of the essential things. And my
like
dear,
law and order.
like law and order, and we're of a similar ilk. But there are some fundamentals in terms of life experience that we've gathered in my 35 years away from home that are fundamentally different, partly because we have lived our adult lives in different eras. Her life was post-war and very settled, and life was good and stable if you worked hard. We once upon a time lived in a meritocracy.
Yeah.
And the digital world has thrown it all up in the air.
It has, but it doesn't alter, and it ought not to alter fundamental beliefs.
Well, no, I know.
And those fault lines.
I know, but in terms of life experience, some of the challenges that I faced in adult life, she didn't.
Yeah,
and so because of that, they have informed me, and so therefore we have differences of opinion on certain quite big things.
Well, that's
just life, isn't it?
Well, I would say so, but it's not under my roof.
No.
Not whilst eating my food.
Yeah.
Not whilst being taken on holiday.
I think that's fair
on
enough.
My bills.
I think that's fair enough.
No, I don't want robots, but I don't want...
No, but they're 20.
No, only one is 20.
Right, and the rest?
22, 25, and 26.
They're grown up.
Only 27.
They're adults.
Well, they should behave like adults then.
Oh. But you can't stop at 26-year-old.
Well, she's not the problem.
Right. She's the good one.
She's the great one. They're all great. They're all great.
I'm not getting into trouble.
And they all vote, which is lovely.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, have a nice time in New York.
Will do.
Yeah. Yeah, OK. Now, the rest of it then, we're not going to talk about Assad coming back here.
No, we're not.
No, what are we going to talk about after the break?
Well, whatever you want to. Well, let's go through. So we've done Christmas. I've done religion. I think we might talk sewage water. Oh.
Yeah.
Because that was just ridiculously.
The public getting water back into the public, into the
Thames
public.
Water diverted clean-up cash to help pay bonuses.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because when I hosted the Talk Radio Breakfast show in 1995, we talked about exactly the same issue.
In 1995?
I'm telling you, the sewage pipes and water. Mark Randall, through the window, was driving the show that day. And I was hosting with Sean Bolger, and Sean, who occasionally went off on one, talked about the incredible wasted water and the infrastructure. And we're talking that's 30 years ago. And nothing has changed. We'll talk about sewage, because we have to. The sewage end of the news right after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And welcome along. This is Jonny Gould in the chair between now and 1 o'clock, and it's wonderful that I've got Claire Muldoon here, because I will be able to be the first in the world to wish you a very Merry Christmas in 24 minutes and 13 seconds time, which I'm very, very pleased and honoured to do so. And your calls are invited to 0344 499 1000. We've done religion. We've done the church. We've done kids and the remote controls and why we're watching TV. But now, Claire...
We can't use the C word, can we?
What, Coventry? No.
No.
What
Thames Water plan to pay staff bonuses out of EcoFund. And this is all from the fact that Thames Water have got a clearing up budget. It's called the clearing up budget. But what they've used is that they've reallocated those funds to pay bonuses to the fat cat.
Oh, it's disgusting.
No, it is metaphorically and literally.
It's literally disgusting. The water table in London is going up. so that when we have very heavy rainfall, basement flats are getting flooded in a way that they weren't 30 years ago. Insurance companies are not insuring because there is a bad track record. I remember in something like April 2022, there was an enormous amount of roofs that caved in and basement flats which were flooded. Damp coursing is a big problem in London and in many other cities where there are basement flats, and this is down to a loss of maintaining infrastructure at the expense of profit.
But we've still got Victorian clay pipes or lead pipes.
But, you know, if they're managed properly, right, if they're managed properly... if
Go and see if you're a psychopath in a minute.
Thank you. If they're managed...
Because you didn't yawn.
No, I didn't. I did. Hang on, excuse me. What was I going to say?
The reason is...
Oh, yeah. Even though Victoria... Like, Victoria... I'm thinking of Bazalgette, who created the London sewers and stopped disease. We're getting mice and rat infestations throughout London, and I'm sure the rest of the country as well, because we are not looking after our infrastructure. And there's nothing wrong with Victorian stuff if it's maintained. Look at the tube stations, for example. The world's oldest tubes run between something like Paddington through Farringdon, and these are from 1865, and they still run perfectly nicely, thank you very much. That's because we spend millions of pounds maintaining them. So the same should be the situation for removing all the fat burgers from our sewers. Should be.
Well, I just don't understand why the water is not being filtered. I don't understand either why London has got such hard water in comparison to the rest of the country. My mother always laments when we return home that, you know, the soap goes much quicker in the shower gel and shampoo, because we're used to giving it large and then all over just to get a bit of a lather.
Yeah.
And you go up there, the water's so soft, you only need a tiny amount, a fraction of the amount, to do the exact same thing. And there's no scum on the tea.
No.
There's no horrible limescale building up in the showers or the shower glass. It really is minging stuff down here.
Yes.
When I first moved down to London, God, nearly 30 years ago, I couldn't stand the hard water. I found it so awful.
Yes.
I used to buy bottled water to boil up in the kettle, and I think that's where Brita got their answer. I think that's where they got their idea from. Me buying my filtered water from the supermarket, because it came from the Glorit estate in Campsie Glen, where I was born and brought up, so I could taste the difference in the water as well.
I went on a walking trip for the weekend with my friends in Cumbria.
Oh.
And
did it rain?
Not that week.
Wow, you were lucky.
It was lovely, and we walked up a hill and we came across
a stream,
water fountains, natural water fountains, and it was being filtered by the chalk.
Yeah.
And we drank it and drank it and drank it, and not only was it delicious, but it was ice cold, and it was the summer, and we drank it and drank it and drank it until, I should say, going to the toilet, what came out of our bodies was the same colour. It was delicious. It was delicious.
It really is.
Beautiful water.
You can taste the difference.
Oh,
and that's why you can taste the difference as well in some Scottish whiskies, because of the water.
It's true. Now, hang on. I've got a chance to do a David Coleman impression of some genuine... And that's it. Let's cross to the Santa tracker, because apparently, Evelyn, he's coming straight over London. And there it is. Quite remarkable, quite extraordinary.
Where is he?
There he is. Oh, look, there's...
Is that the NASA one?
That is... Is it NORAD? Someone can help me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, NORAD. And first of all, you have to believe in Santa Claus for this infrastructure. But where's that? Is that the West End, or is that...
Why wouldn't you? We're not in London yet.
Yeah, there it is. Apparently we're going to have science correspondent Andrew Lound in the next hour, actually telling us
where Santa is. I expected more of Andy, to be honest, but he'll come on the show nevertheless. It's Christmas. Andy is a great guy, and I saw him recently, and we had a chat, as we always do, and what he talks about is truly extraterrestrial. We've talked about computer graphics randomly creating their own lives, where basically you program them, they do different things from the computer. We've talked about UFOs.
Does he have a tinfoil hat?
No, he's just a very interesting guy. And he said, "Here, I've got a book for you. I've just written a book." I said, "Please." And I said, "Sign it, whatever it is, sign it." He pulled it out. It was green, and it's called The History of Hydrogen. And I've got a copy at home. And you know what? I've started reading it.
Have you?
And I'm going on my hollybobs, and I'm going to take him with. Not him, the book.
I was getting...
You know, he's just a great guy. He's a great guy, and Andy's coming on later.
And what's he going to talk about?
He's going to talk about Santa, but hopefully we'll get him on one or two other subjects as well.
Right.
Parker solar tracking, whatever that is. Thank you for that, Adam. 03444991000 as we go through the papers, Claire.
Right. I am quite a huge advocate of education, right?
Yes.
I think it's the only way for children to get out of poverty. I think it helps families more than they know, and I think to be an engaged parent is the best stepping stone, best foundation you could possibly have for your child.
Yeah.
Unlike Starmer, who says that he's going to fix the foundations, build the future and change the plan or whatever it is he's going to do, he can't do that. He's not doing it, and he should be out. And this is much
but
of
we've
the
got 4 more years.
No, we haven't. He should be.
Well, who's going to replace him? Another Labour leader?
Do you think it'll be?
You know what, though?
I've said I think Angela Rayner should do it, and that'll just finish them all off.
Yeah, it would finish it all off.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the Tories get rid of their leaders again and again and again, even in office, but apparently Labour don't do that.
Yeah, because it's much easier to get rid of a Conservative leader than it is a Labour leader, yes.
Right. So we've got Starmer.
Because of the unions.
Yeah, we've just got him, haven't we?
Oh, he's horrible. He's a misogynist. Anyway, look, education. And I think the way the education system is going is just down the tubes into the sewers. What a segue that is there. Yeah. With Bridget Phillipson, who is the Secretary of State for Education, now saying that teachers should be allowed to work from home. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
Can't work.
It really cannot work because they're not university lecturers. The children are not there through choice, right? They have to go to school. That's a legal requirement up until the age of 16, okay? So therefore, teachers just can't swan in, swan out. Don't get me wrong, they're not going to be teaching from home, it says. They're actually going to be doing their planning, their courseworks and marking.
Okay.
That's what they do in free periods when they're not teaching, in non-teaching periods. Why then is the need for classroom assistants if the teaching staff have got the time out, the McRae time it's called, to actually do the marking, do the planning, doing everything else? What happened in our day when our teachers had to do it? And I think we're better educated now. And then to read something like this headline, "Mice and Men are a recipe for emotional harm," schools are told.
Oh, very important book.
Steinbeck's book is going to be pulled from the GCSE English literature syllabus because they would say it causes emotional harm to young kids.
The head of BBC Education was reported yesterday in the media.
Dickens, are you going to talk about the Dickens book?
Yeah, no? And she said that we're in danger of our children being disengaged from their British culture. And I think that's absolutely right. When I was a kid, I used to really like BBC Kids programmes.
Yeah.
And there was, I think, in our day as children, don't know exactly your age, but maybe we're the same generation.
72, I was born. I'm 53 in a couple of weeks.
So I'm a tiny bit older than you, but let's just say we're the same generation. There was more of a kindness for children in
our day, and the education, like for example, Play School, the presenters, they weren't kids.
Brian Cant.
They were like your mum and dad or your uncle and aunt.
Safe
and
adults.
They were nice people, and they were kind.
Well, Jimmy Savile wasn't.
Not him, but he wasn't. Well, he was. I'm talking about great people like Brian Cant.
Rolf Harris.
Not him. But real kids presenters like Brian Cant and Derek Griffiths and Chloe Ashcroft. You know, these were nice people. And on the back of my exercise books in Birmingham in the 70s, there was a 10-point plan on how to cross the road.
Mufti.
Nice.
Tufty. Mufti. The Green Cross Code, do you remember that?
I won't be there when you cross the road. Yes,
was that
he
not,
folded his hands.
Was that not Darth Vader that was the Green Cross Code man?
Yeah, David Prowse, apparently, Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Great career progression for him.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, why do this? To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee's wonderful book, has been removed as well.
No way.
They're sanitising, they're homogenising, and they're not giving critical thought to children to explore their intelligence, to explore their minds, to teach them values, to teach them resilience, to teach them all the virtues that we need to instill in children. They are the future.
And Donald Trump, who's coming back to power in the United States, said the other... Can I say the word BS? Can I say the full word BS at this time? I can say the words that is that. I'm going to quote Donald Trump, because he said, woke is bullshit, and we're going to get rid of it when I come into power, and I'm going to do it throughout the public sector, and I'm going to have a go at trying to do it through the private sector. So maybe finally, this daft period that we will look back on, where merit was destroyed at the expense of positive discrimination, might be over.
Or diversity, inclusion.
We've got to get rid of that. He talked about DER. Yeah, he talked about that.
We've really got to, because do you know what? It's patronising.
Oh.
It's really patronising. And
it's also dangerous. It's racist, and it's prejudiced against women. It's anti-Semitic. It's crazy. Even the new language, they're now changing the word. You know, the BAME word, black and ethnic minority. Yeah. They're now turning it to call it the global majority. In other words, most people are not white. It's got to go. It's racist. It's got to go.
It's unfair.
It's really bad.
And
it's
I remember there was a book called The Da Vinci Code, written by Dan Brown.
Yeah.
And it was scathing in its scandalous approach to both Opus Dei and the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I was part of the committee that the Cardinal then, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, set up, a response group to it, and I was part of that. And I remember saying, there's no other religion that would be, at that time, that would put up with this absolute lies, this teller of lies. And yet we're told by the humanists that we're awful. We're told by everyone that that's what you do. You shouldn't do that, and it's not that, it's not that. They're the very ones that advocate be kind, #be kind, when they themselves aren't. It's almost as if you can only be kind or only be nice if they like you.
Yes, the progressives.
Or if they kind of like, or even the liberal elite, if you are part of them, if they like you,
yes,
then that's fine. But woe betide you if you've actually got a view, you actually stand up for yourself and question it. It's a bit like my kids sitting around my dinner table and questioning me and saying, no!
If you stand up to the progressives, you are a heretic. And we no likey here at Talk, and I know you feel the same through the lens. 03444991000. I'm Jonny Gould. She's Claire Muldoon. Stay tuned.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hey you, have you got Netflix? Because we might have a choice of viewing. Now, both of us have seen this, and we're going to give it the thumbs up. I'm not huge on drama. I'm more like the football and the news. However, my missus is engaged me in something called Black Doves, which is also highly recommended by Claire. You love it, don't you?
One of my makeup artists, actually, in one of
my many makeup
one of the
artists.
stations I work on.
Yes, I have
she said, have you watched it? And I went, no,
Yeah.
you really have to. And as soon as she said the words Sarah Lancashire, that was me. Done.
Yeah.
Tick. And Ben Whishaw, who is an amazing actor.
And she looks very sinister in it.
She's bloody
She's like a
brilliant.
female Ray Winston,
But Black Doves, for me, is a cross between Killing Eve and John Wick. It's like, you know, Sarah Lancashire's character's like the guy who, God, what was his name? He was Lovejoy. What's his name?
Yes.
Yes, you know who I'm talking
Yes.
about, that actor?
Yes.
Ian McShane.
Ian McShane.
Ian McShane's character in John Wick. Have you ever watched those films?
Yeah. Oh,
brilliant.
Oh, really good.
No blood spilled in the Continental, remember? And they
Yes.
pay with the tickets and whatever. It's very much like that. And Papa Isudi is an all-time fave in our house.
And of course, one of the great comedy actors who can also, because great comedy actors are brilliant straight as well. Like, for example, towards the end of Les Dawson's life, he started playing serious roles as well.
Did he?
Yes. He played an Argentinian dictator who couldn't stop eating, and it was about the glutton, being a glutton, and he couldn't stop eating, but he was playing a serious part. And she's a genius, and that's Tracy Ullman.
We're not
Brilliant.
on her episode yet.
Yeah, I mean, she plays a brilliant, nasty, evil
Get
person.
out of my path.
Yeah, really not.
But it's really, I mean, it shows London. It's shot very well.
Isn't
as
it
well.
just?
And the other good thing's called The Agency on Paramount Plus.
Okay,
With
gosh,
Michael
you really get round.
Fassbender, Richard Gere. Well, Johnny, I don't have much time off. And the time I do spend off, I do like to sit and binge. Because I'm running around all
Do
the
you?
time.
And, like, when you sit down, do you sit down for, like, 4 hours and watch telly?
I can do.
Do you really?
I can do.
With
or
chocolate?
I read. No,
No,
with
just
wine.
with wine.
With wine and gin.
Right.
So sometimes I don't actually remember some episodes. Sometimes I actually fall asleep.
Are you asleep by sort of third episode of it?
Yeah. And you go,
Oh, stop! Oh, dear. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm often sleeping during shows, but not through alcohol, through, this is a marvellous way of relaxing.
Well, there is that too.
My dad, bless him, used to enjoy Sky Sports so much that when the game whistled for the start, he used to get his arms, place his head down on the cushion and lie flat on the sofa and go to sleep completely and wake up after the after-match interviews.
Why?
Because he liked to sleep at night. Oh, dear. He wasn't really into football, except that he quite liked to know the score. I got him into football. He wasn't really into football.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, he was very much involved in the headlines. He'd like to know what the score was.
Who scored?
Yeah. And in older age, I mean, I was obsessed with football. I was a football reporter. I was in the business of sports. But I must tell you something. I've had the opposite of a Damascene conversion. I have moved away from football. Believe it or not, there are some players in the Premier League that I've never heard of.
No.
And in the olden days, I used to know who the number 37 for Chelsea was.
So who's the goalkeeper for Celtic now?
Exactly.
Is it not Kasper Schmeichel?
Is it?
I think it might
well,
be.
I know who he is. But there used to be, talking of that, there was a Celtic goalkeeper called Jonny Gould. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He was a good lad.
Remember when... This is a bit political, but I remember when Paul Gascoigne used to play for
Rangers. Yes, you're talking about the flute incident.
No, I'm talking about his Gaza Strip.
Yes.
Because it was all kicking off there then too.
Yes, it was. And when is it not?
When is it not?
When is it
kicking
not
off
kicking
there?
Yes, Gaza at Rangers.
Graham Souness.
Better player than our first thought.
Absolutely.
Oh, he looks bloody brilliant for his age, I have to say.
Listen, he had a heart attack.
I know.
Aged 1992. And
was it not later than that?
No, he
looks amazing.
He's a fit lad, and he's a
really?
I like him. He's a decent guy.
Yeah,
I really like.
So super Ali.
Ali McCoy,
yeah, from Talk Sports.
Absolutely, I really like these guys.
Do you not need subtitles for him though? No.
No, I mean I've followed football for a long time, and so I get all the.
He's very funny.
All of it, yeah. Souness did a lot to try and tackle the sectarianism in Glasgow.
Physically?
No, by signing. No, by signing Catholic players for Rangers.
Well,
he tried to do it.
I wouldn't say plural.
He did. John Spencer, and he brought players in from like French and Spanish clubs, ergo Catholic people.
Yeah, well,
it's good. I mean, he tried. He tried to. Mo Johnston was another.
Oh yeah. Who was the Celtic player? Frank McVenny.
Frank McVenny. Yeah.
Yeah, there was too many white lines in the pitch for him to concentrate on anything.
He was very good at West Ham as well. Let's balance the conversation there. He played once for the Villa as well. Good Frank.
There used to be a great Scottish comedy show. Gosh, I can't even remember what it was called. But the two guys that did it often did takes on things like Frank McAvenny's
extracurricular life.
Extracurricular activities.
Well, jolly good. We're all happy. Claire, it's been... we're literally coming up to the moment in the calendar where I say
so we are.
A very Merry Christmas. I wish you a Happy New Year.
Thank
you for being
so
such
much,
wonderful
Jonny.
company. Thank you for coming on this holiest of nights to come and entertain us and be with us and have a wonderful Christmas and indeed the rest of Christmas and into the new year. Next up, Andrew Lound goes and...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Oh, and it's Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Ho, 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 ho. Ho, 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 ho. Yeah, it's not me. I'm not Father Christmas. I'm too busy here. Wasn't that a brilliant hour with Claire Muldoon? And if you missed any of it, you can scroll back and go to it via the YouTube channel. And probably on your smart TV, you can probably do that. I hope you're having as lovely a time as we are in the studio. 0344 499 1000. Who is your Christmas Grinch this year? We've had a couple of nominations thanks to Rachel, who says it's Rachel Reeves, partly because she gives all Rachels a bad name. Again, this idea about Christmas is helping us this year re-engage with our Britishness, and it's forcing us out of the woke agenda. And what a restful time it is just to enjoy songs from many, many years gone by. And all the Christmas songs, they come from different places. We have the British songs, we have Slade, and we have, you know, Wizard, and we also have the American swing and jazz songs, Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, and the modern songs of Michael Bublé as well. But, you know, it's nice that they talk of a 20th century and 21st century Christmas, a time before wokery. So I wonder what you think of that. Is it an opportunity for us to take a break from the unending wokeness in our society and re-engage with the values of yesteryear? Because let's face it, when you put on the radio or TV, all you hear are Christmas songs. All you see in adverts is getting you to buy things which are for Christmas. And it might be entirely secular and it might be over-commercialised, but also it's still called Christmas. It's not the Winterval or any other phony names they've tried to give to Christmas over the years. It is about Christian values. And if you celebrate Christmas, you are nominally, in some way, connected either literally or familiarly or in your background to Christianity. So it can't be a bad thing, can it? Can it? 0344 499 1000. And because we are now into the realms of Christmas Day and into the day itself, I think it's time to track the NORAD Santa tracker, which apparently has just crossed over London. Shall we talk to our space expert? Let's do that. Let's talk to Andrew Lound. Andy, a very good morning to you and Merry Christmas.
Good morning, Johnny. Merry Christmas to you and your team.
Oh, thanks a lot. How are you doing? What's going down?
I'm good. It's good. We're getting it's very excited over Britain at the moment, of course, because the distribution is going on. Of course, the little elves are out there. We had, I don't know whether you heard it from the previous programme, we talked about the special elf service. This is the advanced brigade, which check all the houses to make sure the children are asleep in their beds. If they're not, they have to check back in about half an hour to an hour later to make sure they are there. So distribution of Santa's presents is ongoing across the United Kingdom as we speak. So it's very exciting.
It is exciting. And where exactly is Santa and his sleigh and reindeers?
Santa's passed over London, passed through came past from Scotland all the way down north of London, and then he'll be going up through Ireland. So this is where his destination will be then.
Okay, so while we're on air, he's going to cross over the Atlantic Ocean. So there won't be much present giving for the next hour or so unless he crosses over the Azores.
Ah, yes, he does. He has to go down Iceland, down to the Azores, then go further south. So he makes sure he covers the islands in the North and South Atlantic, then double back and then head northwards again. And so it's a polar to polar link is what he actually does. And that's because he uses the magnetic fields of the Earth as part of the transport system. So he's travelling at about 48 miles per second in order to cover distance. Yeah.
And after the Azores, does he go north into Greenland?
Yes, he'll have to go. Well, once he goes south and doubles back, he will have to go into Greenland, and that will be given special presents for the Greenland people. And Greenland will not be a present for President Trump.
No, it won't be. I tell you what, Greenland's enormous.
It's the largest island on the planet. It's quite a fantastic territory. Although it's very sad because of greenhouse gases and the global warming, it is losing its glaciers, but it's uncovering some fantastic sites actually on Greenland, some interesting geological sites, and we may actually find some sites of earlier habitation by humans than we ever expected. So it's actually an interesting place now to explore.
It's one of the least talked about countries is it Northern Europe? Is it classed as Europe?
It's classed as North America, yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah, I mean, it's technically owned by Denmark.
That's right.
It is a semi-autonomous state. It has its own flag and it has its own governmental systems that it operates. But although Denmark does technically control it from that point of view, they're responsible for the defence of it, for instance, troops and things like that and defence systems. But not many people talk about Greenland, but it is quite an important mass. And of course, there have been bases and things in Greenland by the United States. And NATO, they've actually had a presence there. In the Second World War, there were presence there as well. So it's quite an important mass of land that very few people really talk about, but although it is quite an important piece of land.
It is. It's absolutely enormous, as you say. Trump is being quite aggressive about the great state of Canada. And he's being a bit cheeky when he calls it the great state of Canada, because he calls the great state of Kentucky as well. Is like equating Canada as being perhaps the 51st state of the United States. Of course, that will not happen, hopefully. There's no reason to antagonise a friendly neighbour who are culturally very similar. But what about Greenland?
It is quite interesting because...
Like Alaska, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Alaska was purchased off the Russians, of course, in the 1860s.
For not very much. What a kit you're wearing, by the way.
Thank you. It's quite good. And
it's quite good. It's amazing. You're wearing this huge cravat, a turquoise cravat.
Quite Dickensian.
You look a bit like Charles Dickens.
Yes, I wish I had the talent of Charles Dickens.
I wish I had his money. 3 shillings and sixpence.
It is, but Greenland. I mean, I think it was not Lyndon Johnson, a previous President Johnson tried to buy Greenland, of course, in the past for the United States, and it was turned down then by Denmark. So Greenland has always been a bone of contention. I remember the interesting thing with Trump with Canada, and especially his interest in Panama as well, because he wants to take Panama. The United States have only ever fought one war where they actually tried to actually do a land grab physically, and that's when they tried to take Canada, which led to the War of 1812, where the British burned Washington and the American president had to flee to the French embassy, which led in the end to the famous Battle of New Orleans, of course, which the English lost, which was irrelevant because by then we'd already signed a peace treaty. So it's interesting that if he decides to go for a land grab to try and take Panama by force, or he's hinted at with Greenland, but I don't think there's any chances of that, that would only be the second time in history that the United States have actually been a major aggressor in a war, which is quite funny. They've always come to either the aid of somebody or to defend somebody or something like that. Only once have they ever been the firm, full-fledged aggressor. And of course, that led to the War of 1812, which the British sailed right across the Atlantic and took them on and landed quite... Although, I'll tell you something what was interesting about that then. Even though they were the aggressor, the two major political parties were completely divided down the middle about that. And it was very interesting to think that half of their government actually supported the invasion, the other half didn't, and supported the British defending Canada.
Goodness me.
Very, very peculiar situation in 1812.
Right. That's fascinating. What is the population of Greenland these days, Andy? Do you know?
That's a good question. I really don't know off the top of my head.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask Siri that question. I'll be
someone
right
to
with
check
you.
it up. Yeah, it would be interesting to know.
Because obviously it's such a massive landmass that actually it is actually probably more important. You know, people should cast their eyes. I mean, the temperatures in the summer are livable, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I mean, it's called Greenland because when it was first visited, of course, it was the summertime and the southern coastal areas were actually really green, so it was called Greenland, naturally, because it actually looked at. But most of the time, it is when the winter comes in, it does cop it because, of course, it's in the Arctic Circle, so it's really going to be quite cold a great deal of the time. And, of course, a great deal of the icebergs that drifted into the oceans come from the southern part of Greenland and they drift into it, but a lot more, of course, fresh water is coming off of it now into the North Atlantic. And this is where people say global warming is not true, it's not happening. It is, because you can look at Greenland and monitor the glaciers on Greenland. You can clearly see that, yeah, something different is happening than has ever happened before, because we're seeing areas of Greenland, mountain ranges and areas like that. Even the possibility of a giant meteorite impact crater has been now discovered, simply because the ice is melting, or actually beginning to see the material there for the very first time.
Is it man-made?
The
global
impact
warming?
crater?
The global warming?
We are seeing an increase in global warming. A lot of it is human involved. It's actually very simple science to actually understand global warming, and many people try to complicate the issue. In the distant past, the Earth was very warm as a planet. Anyway, we're a very warm planet, which led to large plant life growth going all over the place. Plants took the carbon out of the atmosphere, which was high in CO2, carbon dioxide, and they released O2, oxygen 2, and that oxygen 2 is what was very useful for animals such as ourselves. All that carbon which we took out of the atmosphere then was kept by the plants. The plants then died, they became oil and coal. Mankind comes along, burns the oil and coal, and re-releases that carbon that it took out of the atmosphere in the first place back into the atmosphere, and is changing the balance. All that is happening with that is we're reversing a process that happened a ridiculous long time ago, and it does change climate. Climate does change by putting these gases into the atmosphere, and how the Earth will respond to it is interesting. But I think the biggest issue on the planet, people say there's an energy crisis on the planet. There isn't. There's an energy management crisis on the planet, and it's the way we manage our energy usage and resources. And in say, oh well, it's got to be all this or it's got to be all that. No, it isn't. We've got to use the right balance of it, and that's the way it goes. And I think governments tend to react over the way, say, oh, we've got to do all the electric cars, or we've got to use all the heat pumps. That's not going to work. What you need to do is a balance of this, where you can use some, a little bit of everything, and you will get the balance back again. And that's what you need to do. But I think governments, remember, politicians are usually lawyers or accountants. They're not scientists. They don't understand science, and they have no idea what's going on. And therefore, they react in a fiscal way, not in a scientific way.
Right, and hence problems of law come from it. The population of Greenland is 56,699, and the next census is literally next week. So stand by, and we might tweet it together, Andy, this time next week, and we'll get an idea of what the population is again. Now, your world made international headlines today with the Parker Solar Probe, which has flown closer to the sun than any other man-made object in history. And the first question is, has it been burnt to a cinder, or is it about to send us some of the most extraordinary photos of the surface of the sun for the first time in human history?
Yeah, it flew within 4 million miles of the sun. That's deep inside the solar corona, which is the outer atmosphere of the sun. And that can reach ridiculous temperatures into millions of degrees, although the lower part of the sun can be 6,000 degrees. And nobody knows why the upper part is hotter. It shouldn't be hotter in theory, but there's one of the reasons of this mission is it's doing that. It flew there about 5 a.m. on Christmas Eve, and we will not get a signal back from it till the early hours of the 28th of January. So one of the scientists pointed out that they're not going to get much rest or peace of mind over the Christmas period, wanting to know if the spacecraft has made it or not. It may not have done, but we won't know till the 28th of December. And in January, if it succeeded, we'll be transmitting back its data, its imagery, its scientific information about the magnetic flux to see what is heating the corona, and also to try and give us understanding what's driving the solar wind, which is thrust towards the Earth, which causes us some good events and also some dangerous events by damaging satellites, dropping out electrical systems across the planet and things like that. So it's a very, very important study to understand how the nature of our star is.
And there's one other thing which is fascinating about this, which is that it's a NASA project and not Elon Musk.
Oh, well, that goes back a long way. That's why it's done a long time ago. It takes on average 10 to 15 years for a project from concept to actually get into things like that. This was launched in 2018. Okay. And I think you'll find that Elon Musk will specialise in putting humans into space and building the very big launch vehicles to put spacecraft in. And spacecraft like this one, of course, is technically a NASA project, NASA, of course, being the umbrella for a number of organisations, with many universities involved in the actual project itself.
Right.
So you'll find 6 or 7 universities have instruments on a spacecraft designed under the auspices of NASA, and in this particular case launched, of course, by NASA themselves funding it. But other missions which you're going to see in the future, it'll be launched by SpaceX, and they're big boosters or they're smaller boosters, and they're very, very impressive indeed to actually get things going. And for human activities, of course, SpaceX, of course, are really pushing it away, and the new year is going to have a lot of excitement. They're going to actually be testing the first in-fueling in space mission next year. Now, if that comes off, which it has to come off, otherwise they're not going to be able to reach Mars or anywhere else. But if they actually crack that nut, that is going to open up the entire solar system to us. So it means you could put a heavy booster into Earth orbit, refuel it, and pick where you want to go. And it means that with a lot of fuel on board, you can fire those engines for a lot longer. That means you can accelerate better and therefore cut some of the journey times down, which is even more important in many cases, because we can't do that at the moment because the boosters don't refuel themselves. Once they've set off and used their fuel up, that's it. That's the speed you're travelling at, and that's where you have to stay.
So they are creating this satellite, which was started in 2018 to get nearer to the sun than we've ever experienced before. And by the 28th of January, we'll either know that it survived and is sending photos back, or it was burnt to a cinder. So the question is, Andy, what have they built this satellite out of? Is it built out of very heat-resistant megaplastic, or, you know, what is it? What is it created from?
The basic instruments itself, the spacecraft, is pretty standard material, but what they've got in front of it is an 11.5 centimetre thick carbon fibre heat shield. And this is mounted right at the front of the spacecraft, so it's always flying towards the sun with this heat shield in the front. It protects it partly from we call it a heat shield, but it protects it from a lot of things. Plus the extreme light, which would damage the light sensors on board, the radiation, which then hits it, but it also casts a shadow over the instrumentation at the back, and that's really important. So the instrumentation, although at the front of the spacecraft it could be something like 1400, 2000 degrees centigrade, the instrumentation at the back is about room temperature, so it could be about 20 degrees, 24 degrees, something like that, and that's really important. And the spacecraft has now hopefully is flown in just under 4 million miles in from the surface of the sun, and the shadow that's cast back from it covers all the instruments. And this thing's going to keep orbiting the sun anyway, but it can't go any closer, because if it does go a bit closer, that shadow footprint will not be wide enough to cover the instruments. So therefore, this is the maximum it can ever go. So really, it's a question of clever positioning of the heat shield. There is some coolant systems on board to actually pump coolant around, liquid coolant around, keep them cool as well. And as you know, all scientific equipment, electronics work much better when they're cold, not when they're boiling hot. And your computers have these huge vents on them and masses of fans to keep them cool. So it's coolants on board and this fabulous heat shield.
That is really fascinating. And I've got this amazing app, which if you point it at the sky, you can tell which planets you're looking at. And the brightest stars that I keep seeing in the sky are Jupiter and Saturn.
Yeah.
And even one day I noticed how that red-looking star turned out to be Mars.
Yeah,
and
that's
right.
right.
It was absolutely amazing. And all of this you can see over the non-lit polluted area of the Sussex coast. So it's not a major city, and I've really enjoyed doing that. And now you're telling me that the new study ahead of us on the moons around Uranus, I'm going to say, because you're not allowed to say
Uranus,
that anymore.
yeah.
Uranus, thank you very much. Raises apparently the chance of life. We're very close, Andy, to realising that we're not the only people in the universe, are we?
Well, probably not the only living things in the universe.
Right.
Rather than people. We're not looking at intelligent life. Yes, the data from Voyager 2, which flew past Uranus and its moons, are quite interesting, because they actually found it was fairly bland, the environment was around them. And they were quite surprised about that, because when you looked at the photographs of the moons of Uranus, they were actually reasonably large objects.
Right.
They got canyons on them, they got dark features on them, light features on them, but there seemed to be no activity from them. And then when they retraced all the data, they found at the time, again, we're back to the sun here and why we've got this probe at the sun, there'd been a huge amount of solar activity thrusting the solar wind into space. That would have actually passed, of course, Uranus and its moons, because the instruments on board Voyager would have been affected by that, and it would have blanked out anything interesting that it could have observed on the moons. Because the moons, if they'd been outgassing, which is quite possibly they were, or anything like that, would have simply been missed by the Voyager 2 spacecraft because of this solar flare and this solar wind activity crossing over them. And the reanalysis has suggested that actually these moons could be far, far more exciting than anticipated, with oceans underneath them, and they could actually be reasonably active, very similar perhaps to Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, or even Enceladus, one of the moons of Saturn, and there could be outgassings on them. So they really want to go back, and there's a project at the moment on the drawing board to send a spacecraft to Uranus to stay there to do some detailed observation. And the environment deep down underground, of course, if there's liquid water and you've got the right minerals and there's enough heat there and energy in there, could lead to microorganisms. So our solar system on their moons of Jupiter, moons of Saturn, and even the moons of Uranus could actually be teeming with life deep down underneath the surface. It's quite breathtaking, really.
It's fascinating. And another big headline that is definitely in your realm is this incessant amount of drones and UAPs that have been seen across particularly North America. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. He is space expert Andy Lound. It's another exciting hour ahead right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is...
And a very good morning to you. Merry Christmas. It's Jonny Gould here for about another 35 minutes or so. Hope you're enjoying the start of your Christmas. And I don't know if you've got some thoughts about how you're going to celebrate Christmas Day. If you're a bit lonely and perhaps you're on your own this Christmas in a way that perhaps has taken you by surprise, and that in previous years you had the whole family around you, and for whatever reason, either they've moved away or you've lost a dear partner or a husband or wife, and you suddenly find yourself without friends or neighbours. I just want you to know that we're here for you. And that I hope that we are the semblance of some comfort and company for you and we're here all the way through Christmas. 0344 499 1000. I'm back with you on Boxing Day at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I hope you'll spare some time to join me. If you want to have a chat, you want to text us in on that subject, tell us about your Christmases of the past or what you're doing today. I would be delighted to read them out and share that with the rest of the world right here on Talk. Now, something which has been bothering me, and I think a lot of people who live in North America, are the increased sightings of drones and other UAPs. And apparently we've also seen a giant lit orb shoot down a drone as well. We've got some shots of this as we talk about it with our space expert, Andy Lound. Andy, what is going on in this new and unexpected surveillance system, which is a great mystery to people in North America?
Yeah, there's been an awful lot of activity with some forms of drones. It's interesting people refer to them fairly quickly as drone systems, which are operating. And what's going on is open to a great deal of debate because, of course, some of the military bases where these things have been flying over, the bases have pointed out that no, there's nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, which means, well, you must obviously know what drones these are and what is actually going on. Yeah. I almost get the feeling, though, looking at some of them, I mean, a drone could be anything from something that fits into your hand to something the size of a small aircraft. And I'm also wondering now that, given the experience in Ukraine, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, where drones are playing an ever more important, in fact, it's almost outmaneuvered the artillery systems that are operating there. I'm wondering now if there is a system being set up now to use armed drones to actually protect airfields, air bases and facilities now in North America and perhaps even in the UK, and they're buzzing around a great deal for security reasons. And of course, people say, oh, well, yes, it could be people just messing around. If it's people messing around, and they do tend to stop them, they do tend to be able to block their signal and bring them out of the sky. I think there was a very good drone operator being interviewed on Talk a couple of weeks ago who pointed this out, that he flew a drone up then to have a look what was going on, and immediately as he got to the base, his signal stopped and his drone collapsed down to the ground. So he'd lost signal, which meant they were blocking it, but there were still drones flying, which suggested to me, therefore, these are probably military drones which we're seeing in operation more over than not. And more often than not, probably now, we're seeing military drones which are probably armed as defensive systems.
You know, that's the thing. I mean, we've seen some really awful footage taken from drones, particularly over the Ukraine and Russian war. Some really really high definition, almost 4K camera pictures of war zones, which bring them straight to your social media side. And you're absolutely right. It seems to be outmaneuvering the artillery. And the next question is, where will this end? I mean, should there be some sort of air traffic control to protect helicopters and other aircraft from these tiny little buzzes? We've seen Yemen, the Houthis, flying these tiny drones and causing extensive damage into Israel's defense mechanism, which is particularly, or you would have thought, was too sophisticated for this, but has caused terrible trouble to the IDF.
Yeah, I mean, technology is available virtually online, and you can do some modifications to online equipment that you can buy. You can go to Amazon, you can buy something for a couple of £100, or you can buy something for several £1,000 off Amazon, a drone, and you can do the modifications you need to required to use it then for other purposes. Of course, there are civil aviation regulations to follow. There are federal regulations in the United States. Across Europe, there are strict regulations to fly drones. But of course, we said this about everything, whether it's a gun, whether it's a drone, or even whether it's a knife. There are as many regulations as you like, but if someone's determined to misuse that piece of equipment, they will do so. And there's not a lot you can do to stop them. The trick is to intercept the drone itself. With AI technology, we also have another game plan coming into the thing here now, where AI technology might therefore be adding to the software issues regarding drones, drone flying. Because would we have AI technology, for instance, that could overcome the blocks that are placing on it, so it could actually change its frequencies for operating? So the whole host of, it's just unbelievable. Now we've seen the Google chip, which has been demonstrated, the new quantum chip, which has been demonstrated. There's no question then that in just a few years' time, the quantum chip is going to be available commercially across the planet. That can, I think, for a regular high-powered chip, a calculation that would take something like 20 trillion years for it to work out, the quantum chip can actually do in a few seconds. So think of that, of data processing for visuals, for navigation, for flight control, for intercepting, for avoidance. The potential for drones is absolutely terrifying if they're in the wrong hands. And I think the defence systems to counteract them is something that I personally think that's probably what we're observing to a certain degree. We're seeing defensive systems being put into place. And of course, it doesn't take a lot of soldiers to operate a defence system like that, or fighter pilots and aircraft. They are robotically controlled drones. And in fact, I think the British Aerospace many years ago were experimenting on pilotless fighter planes anyway, where the pilot actually sits in a control centre, whether it's in Lincolnshire or London or anywhere, and actually flies the fighter plane, and it could be being flown 8,000 miles away, controlled by satellites, and you're actually involved in an air war where there is no pilot in the aircraft. It is just the aircraft. And that seems to be the way we're moving at the moment, to a much more automated war than we anticipated.
Wow. And on that, we're talking about a new lunar lander mission now scheduled for next month. Now, I mean, we know about one small step for man, one small step for giant step for late. I've just got that all wrong. But you know exactly what I was going to say. It's been going around since the 1960s. What kind of lunar lander mission can we possibly learn now?
Yes, this is Blue Ghost. This is going to be launched by your favourite, SpaceX, the Falcon 9 launch.
How lovely. And what's great is that, you know, it can only be genuine because Stanley Kubrick's not with us anymore.
Oh, dear. Yeah, and this is part of a long duration program of private enterprises. Although NASA are actually working with this, with instruments on board it to drop onto the lunar surface. It includes a lunar lander to do there. That's going to be followed very quickly by a Japanese lunar lander called Resilience.
Wow.
That's going to drop on there. And then Tenacious, which is essentially Dutch iSpace Europe, will be putting a lunar rover on the moon in January as well. We've got 3 lunar landers going to the moon in January, and this is all part of the international community building up for the Artemis project for operating a base on the moon, that's the Western, what we call the Western base, because the Chinese will be doing their own base, of course, with their own friends and allies. But this is all part of the build-up to this now, and you're seeing more and more private enterprise coming into it. In fact, the moon is going to be completely plastered during the year, because we've got a lunar hopper going there, which is going in February. Trailblazer, that's going there. Athena, that's going to be landing there. We've got the Finns and the Americans working together on something called M1 MAP, and that's a lunar rover, and that's going onto the surface. So, and Astro Ant and Yoki from Japan, all that is going to the moon. So by the end of February, in theory, we could have something like 7 to 8 landers on the surface of the moon.
That is amazing. Because in the olden days of the Cold War, there really were only 2 players. There was the US and there was the Soviet Union. It was called the space race. And so the multipolar world that we talk about down on Earth is being exacerbated. I mean, even the Indians have got involved in space exploration as well.
Yes, Indian Space Research Organisation, which has been going for quite a period of time. It's a very interesting group. I actually had some connections with them many, many years ago, and they're a very, very interesting organisation indeed. And they're pushing their technologies very high. I mean, some people have criticised India for having a space program when they've got other issues, but it actually is only 0.4% of their GDP that they're spending on it. But it's enough actually to actually get good equipment. It's actually cheaper to do things in India, interestingly enough, than it is in the West. So that does have that rolls into the program.
Right, you could outsource your space project to India.
That's a point. And of course, the technology is about. We've got some very, very good software technologists in India, very good mathematicians. And of course, they need that for actually doing the software development. And that's where they've had a bit of a leap ahead, I think, as much as anything else. They can buy bits of hardware in, but they've got software engineers to do their own software development. And that's quite a big leap. And they're hoping to put in their own astronauts into space in a couple of years' time. They've already been doing the testing of the vehicle for re-entry. And they're hoping then to do their own Earth Space Station as well, which will be up there. So we're seeing a lot of these nations coming on board because simply the technology is more easily available. They just can afford it now with the way their economies have grown. They can actually afford it, although the price of the technology has dropped. And when you've got a lot of these students going around the world to study in universities in the United States, in Britain, or in other parts of Europe, they're learning the skills and knowledge that they need and then taking them back home and therefore developing their own industries there, which they then can resell to other nations as part of an industry. And India do see their space program as part of their economics, so they can actually sell their satellite launches to launch people into space. Elon Musk seems to be really ahead of that at the moment. And that's what European Space Agency were hoping to do with the Ariane program. But that is quite an expensive program. It's a good vehicles, but they're very expensive to actually launch, say, compared to SpaceX or to India. And Japan are running into some problems at the moment. But China, of all places, are looking at doing private space enterprise with their own people. Of anybody, China, a communist nation, is very much operating their capitalist activities better than we can, and that's quite ironic, really. They seem to be much more capable of organising it, but they are a central state, and when you've got a centralised state system, you can get things done a lot better and a lot faster sometimes. And that's, I think, the big difference they have.
That's it. A top-down society, the strong man at the top of government is really a challenge to our democracy. And you've just demonstrated, using space exploration, the fiscal challenge that we have to our democratic systems in the West. Fascinating stuff. Space is the future of international diplomacy, amongst many other things.
Oh, yes. Yes, I mean, Richard Nixon was very keen on that. That's why Richard Nixon cancelled the Apollo program in the early 70s, because he felt Earth orbiting space stations was one way of actually using it as a way of bringing nations together. And the first nation he spoke to, strangely enough, about this concept was Britain, oddly enough. And we sadly, there was a change of government. If you remember the early 70s, we had governments rising and falling.
We did, 74.
Yeah, and it messed everything up a little bit, which is a shame, really, because we were really in very quickly there. And that's why Nixon saw the space program with space stations as being a way of bringing nations together and working more closely together. Because as you all probably know from your own history, he was trying to bring China closer on board with everybody, which was then abandoned by later presidents. And I always wonder that if Nixon's policy with China had been continued, would we be in the mess we're in now with China?
Very good question indeed, indeed. Many more fascinating avenues for us to examine. Before we go to the break, let's have a look at the quick NORAD. Shall we have a quick see where NORAD is? Oh, gosh, where's that, Andy?
Let's have a look. Where is? Let's have a look. I'm just calling it up on my chart here now.
48 miles a second.
He's at Port Stanley, the Falkland Islands.
Oh, what a perfect opportunity to say the Falklands. It's ours.
Yeah, Falkland Islands is there. It never belonged to Argentina historically. It really did not.
No. I mean, I like Javier Milei, but it's ours, mate.
Yeah, there we go. Although I do like Argentine tango at Buenos Aires, so that's another story.
Nothing wrong with that. And Maradona, apart from his handballs.
I don't know. See, I was a very big fan of the '78 World Cup winning team.
Oh, wasn't that lovely?
What a fantastic team that was.
Mario Kempes, Daniel Passarella.
Kempes, what a Ricardo Villa, what a fantastic player he was. Very big, much of a bloke, but what a gentle player, wonderful.
And Cesar Luis Menotti, who liked a fag.
Oh yeah,
he liked to smoke,
on the side of the pitch, chain smoking.
It's what attracted Barcelona for his attention. Like he loved to smoke a fag. I just used to love those gentlemen chairmen who used to smoke cigars in the boardroom.
Yes.
Come on, look, I think that Brian Clough's time at the club is very much over. And we're going to appoint another person to the job who will get us relegated within 2 seasons, I think. Isn't that lovely? The 70s, re-examined here with Andy Land. So we'll take a short break. More of Andy in just a moment. Stay tuned.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a warm welcome to your Christmas Day. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. I'm Jonny Gould. I'm here for just a matter of another quarter of an hour, but it would be impossible to continue without my friend Andy Lound here as our resident space expert. Now, there are two very brave astronauts who have to be very, very brave because they're lost in space. Butch Wilmore...
Almost.
That's it. We had to go because we can't do reverb here, apparently. Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, they're NASA astronauts. They were originally part of the CFT mission, and they launched to the International Space Station in June 2024 for what was supposed to be an 8-day mission. But 7 months later, Andy, they are still stuck in space, and there doesn't seem to be any opportunity for them to come home.
Well, yeah, I mean, the press have made a lot of comments about this. Stuck in space, stranded. It's not quite as bad as that. Their job on their initial flight, which was supposed to last a maximum 10 days, but generally 7 to 8 days nominal, was to test out the new Boeing Starliner spacecraft. And the problem with that was, in fact, that the spacecraft had a number of technical issues, shall we say.
Yeah.
And they couldn't take the risk of bringing it back immediately because they weren't sure what sort of damage it had or what the issues were. Thrusters weren't working correctly. They had one or two other issues with it. And then it was decided they would bring the spacecraft back, but they'd have to leave the astronauts on board because they wouldn't take the risk as a risk assessment. Couldn't take the risk of the astronauts if something went badly wrong and they're being killed. And as it turned out, the spacecraft, when it came back perfectly successfully. The heat shield held and everything was fine. But of course, by then, of course, they'd left the astronauts behind. However, the thing was, there's another mission going up. That other mission will bring up extra supplies and equipment, extra spacesuits, the usual things that are needed for them. Their spare clothes, because of course they hadn't brought any spare clothes with them or anything like that. So what they decided to do instead was to leave them there to carry on working on the space station, and they would bring them back with a Dragon spacecraft when the two astronauts which were put up there to do some work would come back, and they'll simply go back with two other astronauts. The mission, of course, was supposed to have 4 astronauts going up, but they've actually changed that. So Sunita and Butch just simply stay there and do their work. We've got to also emphasize this. These were two very, very experienced astronauts. They're no fools. I mean, they were commanders in space before themselves. They've done spacewalks even. They're very experienced. And that's why they were doing the test flight of this spacecraft, because they were their expertise. So they could cope with this changing situation very quickly. And the old joke is like probably the same in your job working at Talk. If you can't take a joke, you don't join the company. It's one of those things. And so they ended up on the space station to carry on additional work. And of course, the only, as they said, the only upsetting thing was they were expected to be home for Christmas, and it meant that their families had to make all different arrangements. For them, they stay in space. But they will be coming back once Dragon and its 2 crew members have completed their task, so they will be getting a ride back. They were never, ever stranded, never, ever in danger. And that's really quite important.
Very important. What about food? Have they got enough toothpaste?
Plenty. There's plenty of food stores on the spacecraft. The International Space Station is constantly replenished anyway by Russian-built Progress spacecraft and by Dragon cargo spacecraft. So there is no problems with supplies or anything like that. Water on board, there is never a problem with water on board because, of course, they use hydrogen fuel cells as part of the system on board, which takes hydrogen and oxygen, puts it together. That generates electricity, and the byproduct is drinking water. So
wow. That's absolutely brilliant. Science in action. Now, in the olden days, you used to have to go to Aberdeen to see the Northern Lights.
Yes.
And then one afternoon, I see Mike Graham walking his dog on Worthing Beach. He looks into the sky and goes, "Oh, look at that. Oh, that's amazing, that. I can see Northern Lights." It's all over.
That's a good impression, then. Is that very good?
I think so, yeah. So there, I mean, I shame because I missed it. I was asleep, but there were Northern Lights all over the southeast of England.
Yes.
How come? First time ever?
Not the first time ever. It's happened before. It happens on rare occasions. And again, we're back to the why we've got this spacecraft looking at the sun in the corona. The sun goes through the 11-year cycle, which is the solar cycle. It goes through its maximum after 11 years. And we've been going through a maximum period where the sun has solar flares, these huge bursts of energy coming out of the sun that actually heats the corona, we believe, and then thrusts particles out towards into the solar system. If a solar flare, a really big one, happens to be on the side of the sun that's facing the Earth at the time, then we can get a really big blast of this material. The material flies, our magnetic field on the Earth drags the particles and pulls them to north and south polar regions, at which point you get what's called the northern lights, this interaction of the solar wind with our magnetic fields. If it's a big burst, then the actual effects can actually stretch quite far down. And in this particular case, it stretched right down to the south coast. For instance, the name Aurora was given to them by Galileo Galilei. Now, think Galileo Galilei lived in Italy, so he'd actually seen the Northern Lights. Now, that's very far south.
Mamma mia, mamma mia.
Absolutely, and therefore they'd seen these. So he was actually observed them, which was quite fascinating. So it has happened before when the sun can be very, very active indeed, and therefore that's what's been happening. And over the last year, it's been very active indeed, and we've been facing it. And of importance, again, while the solar probe has gone there, we get an event called the Carrington event, which the last Carrington event was it's 1850 something. I can't remember the exact year itself. 1850 something, and Carrington had observed a huge solar flare on the sun. It was so bright that it actually shone through the telescope, and he was quite stunned at what he was looking at. He had completely filtered, and yet it still shone through. Several days later, there was a burst of energy blasted onto the Earth. Telegraph cables was how we used our communications, burst into flames, set fire to fields, and this was the effect of these particles colliding with the Earth. It's been felt that if a Carrington event hit the Earth now, because we're so dependent on the electronic communication, we could actually have a global blackout with this. This is a really serious issue that people have to investigate.
And would people lose all their technology and all their banking numbers, and would people lose all their fortunes?
You're looking at, you're looking at a potential catastrophe. One of the issues we have with perhaps even God heaven forbid, a war, is that you do what's called an electromagnetic strike, where you detonate something in the atmosphere, and it causes an electromagnetic pulse. And the idea is that's to fry all your electronic equipment. It will be the same as that. And it has happened in Canada in the 1980s. A solar flare did actually lead to the knocking out of the power systems in Canada for a period of time. So it has happened before, but a big one like what's called the Carrington event, which could happen once every 100 years or so, maybe 200, no one's really certain, could be devastating. Now, for instance, satellite instrumentation will be fried. And when they have a fear of it, and this happened actually this year, when they thought there could be major events, what they do is they put the satellites into standby and safety mode, switching systems off to stop the electronics being fried.
Wow, this is brilliant stuff. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the space station dodging debris from a Chinese satellite. We'll talk about that and more right after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Jonny Gould in the chair for another 5 or 6 minutes, and then at 1 o'clock, don't miss the TalkSport Christmas dinner, followed at 2 o'clock by Hawksby and Jacobs' Clips of the Year. If you like clips and you like Hawksby and Jacobs, there's just one place to listen out for that. In fact, two. There's Talk and there's TalkSport. But in the meantime, I know what I wanted to do. Before we talk about the space station dodging debris from China's satellite weaponry in 2007, I wanted to ask our resident space expert, Andy, again, still on the line with us. Andy, can we predict where the Northern Lights might be seen again? And could we have predicted this amazing transformation of the skies in the South Coast when it did happen?
No, we can't predict them in far advance. What we get is, if we get a solar flare, which we observe on the sun, we get what's called a space weather alert goes out and said there's been a big solar flare. They have a variety of categories. Solar energy, obviously the solar wind is going to collide with the Earth's atmosphere, and there is a potential for auroral activity. But that doesn't necessarily mean there will be, because these things are hard to predict. So we get sort of a rule of thumb saying it's a good time to go out and take a look. And if people make the alert, it's worth going out, but it's not a guarantee that we'll actually see anything, because we might not. So the only time we will get an advance notice is if there's a big solar flare and it's pointing towards the Earth. Otherwise, there's absolutely no way at this moment in time of predicting auroral activity.
OK, fair enough. That's very interesting. Thank you for that. So no space tourism for those of us who want to head down to the seaside to see where it may or may not appear. Now, the space station has dodged debris. We're talking about the threat of drones to civil aircraft, but what about the debris which came from a Chinese satellite weapon test, incredibly,
yes,
18 years ago?
Yes, the Chinese opened fire on one of their own satellites, a defunct satellite, as a defensive test. They said it was done in order to remove old satellites. But what they did was they shattered the satellite up into 3,500 pieces or so. Now, these pieces, even if they're a very tiny flecks of paint even, are still travelling at 17,500 miles per hour. Therefore, the laws of physics will apply, that even if something like that hits you, and you suddenly stop it by your physical presence, there will be a transfer of energy, and that will cause a great deal of damage to you or to a spacecraft if it hits it. And the space station has had to avoid some material from this. They haven't said how big the pieces were, but they had to fire the engines on board a Progress cargo vessel, which we mentioned earlier, which had docked to the space station, a Russian spacecraft, fired its engines in order to increase the altitude of the space station by quite a bit, actually, to try and avoid any debris that was going towards it. And this is a more and more becoming a big issue with all the debris that's flying around in space. I think there's something like 27,000 pieces of debris which pose a potential threat to low Earth orbit spacecraft, which the space station actually is in. Not high Earth orbit. There's little in high Earth orbit, but there's a great deal in low Earth orbit. And that is a real problem that has to be tried and solved.
I tell you, you're right, Andy, and because the way that space traffic is increasing and increasing, it's a bit like the Wild West. It's like the gold rush of 200 years ago. Before we go off to celebrate TalkSport's Christmas dinner, I think it's time that we tracked Santa. Shall we find out where it's moved on since Port Stanley? Gosh, where's that?
Montevideo, Uruguay in 53 seconds.
Oh, that's great. And
right.
That's the capital of Uruguay, noch.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Uruguay, of course, the first winners of the World Cup in 1930, which is always quite interesting.
That's right. They won it again in 1938 as well.
You could be also one of the players in that first World Cup, I think, had part of his arm missing.
Right.
Which was quite interesting. And I always thought that was